G'day, mate 40 here. Steve Saylor notes that when the elites went on Twitter and started getting criticized directly, they went they went crazy. And the insanity in the mainstream media of the last 4 years about the threat posed by the alt-right, and compare that to the complete lack of attention to the much larger and destructive Antifa, may be largely due to journalists being laughed at on Twitter. So the dissident right has had a lot of cutting commentary about journalists, and journalists couldn't hack it, so they had to go on a jihad to cut down the alt-right, to dox the alt-right, to deprive them of income, to get them fired from their jobs, to make life as miserable as possible, because a lot of people just can't deal with criticism. They feel like they're about to be attacked by a mob and murdered when they get a few dozen tweets making fun of them. Do you remember that Japanese American journalist for CBS Online who did that 25-minute documentary that featured 2 minutes of JF Gariépy? And early on in the documentary, he talks about how he's driving to visit someone who lives in his parents' home in a middle-class neighborhood in Texas, and how scared he is that he's going to visit this guy who posts on Paul. Like, absolutely terrified. So when did the phrase learn to code, when did that phrase become socially unacceptable? When did you start to get banned from Twitter for simply tweeting learn to code at someone? Only when it was directed at journalists, right? Prior to it being directed at journalists, it was completely fair game. But as soon as you started tweeting learn to code at journalists, then it became verboten. You notice that comment section all over the news industry have been largely shut down. And the ostensible reason is that they no longer want to provide a platform for hate speech. But the real reason is that writers are growing angry, that commenters are not just poking holes in the facts of their stories, but blowing large gaps in their entire narratives. And so this kind of critical feedback is making journos feel unsafe. Ergo, the overwhelming majority of news sites now disable comment section because we just can't have our journalists feeling unsafe by any criticism. Terrific essay here by Steve Saylor, and the comments are rich. So why did we have this explosion of protests after the death of George Floyd? Even though the victim was far from ideal, the released footage was tailor-made for tugging at the heartstrings of social justice warriors, and those who are all about the feels and absolutely impervious to facts and logic. Now, why was the more illuminating footage suppressed along with the toxicology report? Why did the news media for weeks talk about it as though it was a matter of fact that it was the police who killed George Floyd, when really he died of a fentanyl overdose? So, because it felt so personal to people who rely on social media, that their most violent and tender emotions were aroused, that George Floyd perhaps became to seem like a member of one's private inner circle, an idealized friend. Notes here in the comments: this is what happens when you accept George Floyd into your life as your savior, and you begin to have a personal relationship with him. You then go out and riot. Now, there's no shortage of horrific violent crime visited on all groups, including white people. An incredibly fair amount of it can be still found at times on YouTube and similar platforms, at least until the site moderators find out about it. Now, the reason a criminal like George Floyd, a convicted felon who stuck a gun in a pregnant woman's stomach, knocked her around, he's made into an international media sensation, while no one's ever heard of the poor white guy John Gear who got shot to death by the cops, isn't a matter of technology. It's a matter of which examples the owners of the mass media decide to select and amplify. Most social justice warriors have a personality disorder. They don't deal well with the internet. A lot of people just cannot handle being criticized. And so the elites have gone mad. Big media and big journalism and big tech have all ganged up to try to suppress and limit criticism of journalists and criticism of the predominant narrative as much as possible. So most social justice warriors have some kind of personality disorder. They don't deal well with the internet, even though they're the ones who grew up on the internet. You'd think that they'd learn to control it, set emotional barriers between the internet and themselves, but they can't. So everything that happens on the net is now personal to them. They internalize other people's outrage, and they launch attacks on perfect strangers because of this nonsense. They try to get people fired, physically attack them for their opinions, try to blind a stranger with lasers because they don't like their politics. Now, the wonderful thing about social media is that women are now really involved in intellectual and political conversations. Now, sure, they used to read the newspaper and watch the news, and they had opinions, but they were not a significant part of the feedback. They weren't the people writing the letters to the editor and engaging in actual intellectual debate. But now with social media, women are driving our political and intellectual conversation. And isn't that great? It's a wonderful thing. Now, some say that with the death of George Floyd, that the public experienced a digital murder, which of course is not true. What they experienced was a digital drug overdose marketed to them as murder. Anyone who wishes to know whether journalists can take a joke need only look at the heavily censored or outright banished comment section of mainstream news websites. Do not even dream of criticizing these people. They have no humor at all, let alone the capacity for self-reflection. Modern-day journalism is now a conversation in which reporters tell the masses exactly what they should be thinking, or else, or they'll dox you and destroy you. Well, the excitement over the interactive nature of the online world went away the moment it became clear that the great unwashed might derive a great deal of pleasure from the discomfiture of political hacks being called out as political hacks. Turned out the great unwashed did not intend to defer to the journalist. So criticism, dissent, and heaven forfend mockery are clearly holdover institutions of white privilege. Boo. So just nod your head, mouth the officially approved platitudes, put another Black Lives Matter sign in the window, you racist lout. Perhaps the personalization of the internet via social media is like the La Brea tar pit for many people with mental health problems. So an early 20s female college student, my acquaintance, posted nude photos of herself weekly on Twitter and on Instagram, often with the pansexual pride flag in the background. She was a social justice warrior online as well. Having lots of internet followers makes them crazier than they were when they first aspired to having followers. How do these kids ever free themselves from social media's vicious cycle? Now, has Antifa killed anyone? Well, the Dayton shooter Connor Betts killed 9, and his Twitter feed showed he identified as Antifa, but since Antifa does not give out membership cards, like the Mafia Antifa claims they don't even exist, perhaps the Connor Betts example is all you need to prove that, yeah, Antifa does murder people. Now, people have always responded to stories on a personal level. Uncle Tom's Cabin helped start the Civil War. The TV pictures from Vietnam strongly affected people back home. Now we have so many stories, so much media, so much information overloading our circuits. And people increasingly live their lives online. They decreasingly have flesh and blood friends and families that they're close to. They decreasingly look up from their cell phones to acknowledge anyone's existence. And so they've increasingly replaced reality with the stories that are being manufactured for them. Reading here the best comments from Steve Saylor's blog. Up until the World Wars, the United States cities were run by women's clubs. The clubs ensured a quiet environment for marriage and for children that the women needed, also ensured that anybody the women disliked ran into severe trouble. Men who hit their wives, women who violated the moral code, men who wouldn't marry their pregnant girlfriends, and so on. And plenty of relief was extended to people who'd been unlucky. The women's clubs included the wives of just about every important person in town, thus they were adequately funded and had adequate informal enforcement available. Eventually, however, the women's club phenomenon was destroyed by the bureaucratization of social work, which is all government paid, funded, and controlled. Now, were the George Floyd riots organic or were they astroturfed? I think they were significantly organic. I don't think it has to be either or. So I'm sure there was some organization behind it. But I also think it was in large part organic. But this comment says, they weren't organic. I refuse to even call them the George Floyd riots. That's just the legacy media's cover story. It's a left-wing insurrection spearheaded by Antifa, funded by philanthropists like George Soros and Work Capital, protected from prosecution or retaliation by astoundingly corrupt city officials seeking high status and re-election, sanitized for public consumption by a mainstream media which long ago abandoned even the flimsiest pretense of caring about the facts, and bolstered by intellectuals from college and university departments that should never have existed. Like every other revolution, it's a complete top-down mess. There's no need or purpose to explain the nation's outrage, because there isn't such outrage. It's all made up. Anyone who uses the term George Floyd protests, this guy claims, you're just part of the conspiracy. Okay, I think that's a tad strong. But how do we learn to become an anti-racist? According to this intellectual, the idea of the dangerous black neighborhood is the most racist idea in the world. That's according to Ibram X. Kendi, distinguished author of How to Be an Anti-Racist. Now, just coincidentally, United States cities with the highest 2020 violent crime rates, combined with the 2010 census percentage of black residents, Detroit, most violent city, 82.7% black, Memphis, 63% black, Birmingham, 73% black, Baltimore, 64%, and Flint at 57%. But remember, according to Ibram X. Kendi, the idea of the dangerous black neighborhood is the most dangerous racist idea. So, don't be dangerous, guys. Bernard says, I think the riots were organic. I think George Floyd's death was merely a trigger for people sick of the lockdown, a convenient excuse. Alexander says, whites have been convinced that being a racist is the worst thing possible, worse than being a child molester. In the eyes of anti-racists, you're a racist just for existing. Dooovid says the whole George Floyd fiasco makes looking at the Lubavitcher Rebbe as the Mashiach, the Messiah, seem quite logical. According to the best-selling book, White Fragility, all white people are racist just for existing, even if they devote their entire lives to anti-racism. Scott Adams pointed out the Joker film may have had something to do with the riots. And yes, Uncle Tom's Cabin is considered racist today. Getting pulled over for running a red light, that is now fascist. Look at how fast journalists moved to shut down the caustic learn to code meme that was directed at laid-off journalists. The media came to hate the internet for permitting their version of the news to be challenged. That's why media outlets are increasingly shutting down comment section, making it more difficult to post un-PC opinions online. I remember one guy who worked at Yahoo for a while. He read about his experiences. He noted that the one thing people most want to write about online in a comment section is racist stuff. The George Floyd reaction was pre-planned. It all happened too quickly in too many places around the globe to suppose otherwise. Can you believe that the media from Costco magazine to the Smithsonian magazine to my local credit union had all black advertisements in place within days? Self-appointed guardian of conservatism, David Brooks, demands that the Republican Party adopt the anti-sailor strategy. David Brooks says, to have any shot of surviving as a major party, the GOP has to build a cross-racial alliance among working-class whites, working-class Hispanics, and some working-class blacks. None of this works unless Republicans can deracialize their appeal. They must stop pandering to the racists in the party and stop presenting themselves and seeing themselves as the party of white people. Yes, but what about the Democrats? Can they stop racializing their appeal? The Democratic Party has self-consciously become the black party. Is it okay for the Democrats to appeal to racial solidarity? Is it okay for the Democrats to present themselves and to see themselves as the party of black people? Next comment. One of my favorite MSM suggestions of recent years, MSM stands for the mainstream media, was that of requiring news websites to be licensed by the government. No doubt these theoretical licenses would be administered with the able assistance of the Anti-Defamation League or some other anti-crime think organization. Can you just see Ron Unz applying for one of these rarely granted licenses and being told that his application was under active review? They're working very hard on rushing his license to him, and he could expect to receive it in the post any day now. Any day now. Honest, any day now. Okay, let's look at some of the lovely members of Antifa being arrested in Portland. Josh Warner, 25-year-old male to female transsexual, charged with unlawful use of a laser, interfering with an officer. This is Riley Isley Harris, formerly known as Timothy Michael Harris, 31-year-old transsexual, previously charged with felony assault at another violent protest. Here's the fetching Kathleen Mahoney, another Portland attorney arrested at an Antifa riot. And there's Ren Lasky, a 28-year-old female to male transsexual charged with felonies. Kyle Roach. Okay, so these are some of the people who've been arrested for felonies in Portland. It seemed quite a few male to female transsexuals there. Not quite sure why. And a little bit of rioting and looting breaking out on Chicago's Magnificent
Overnight
Mile.
Chaos in the streets of Chicago. Looting taking place around the city.
Just woke up to a huge explosion. That's the Nordstrom.
Images posted on social media showing store windows broken, intense police presence, and fires. It comes hours after police were called about a man with a gun on Sunday afternoon. Officers located an individual in the area who they say matched the suspect's description. Police say he fired at approaching officers who then fired back, striking the shooter. They say he was in his late teens or 20s. Emotions in the area quickly running high after false information spread about the suspect's age.
Young person that was shot, that was the misinformation. With some other misinformation about a cell phone that was missing.
Officers now asking for the public to take a step back and work with police before more people get hurt and more damage is done.
And Savannah, this marks the end of what was already a violent weekend in the city of Chicago. 3 people killed, at least 32 shot in shootings across the city. We'll hear from the police chief later this morning, and an investigation into the shooting that might have started this looting will be underway.
Okay, that's what's going on in Chicago. So we've had this massive amount of crime since George Floyd's arrest and death. Now, most crime figures, virtually all crime figures, can be heavily massaged. They can be manipulated. The paperwork can be lost. There can be all sorts of distortions going on with almost all crime figures. But there's one crime that you can't really play around with very effectively, and that's murder rates. That's the most important crime statistic, obviously, because people are losing their lives. And also, it's the one crime statistic that the police and the bureaucrats can't mess with. And so if you're trying to figure out which crime stats mean the most, because we've got some crime stats going up and others going down, so how to know what's really going on? Well, look at murder rates. And in many American cities, they're going up by 50% or even 100% since George Floyd's death. Okay, here is classically Abby's faith story.
Hello, beautiful ladies, and welcome to today's video, where we're going to be talking about my faith story. So as I've talked about on my channel quite a bit, I'm Jewish, and I would say that my faith has taken quite a journey to where it's at now, and I'm looking forward to where it's going to go. So I really wanted to share with you guys a little bit about my story, because I grew up Orthodox. Right now I would say that we are Orthodox aspiring. We're not actually Orthodox as of right now, although we believe that the tenets of Orthodoxy are what we should be keeping. But there is a story for me for how I got to this point and how I know where we're aiming for. And I really wanted to share it with you because faith can be something that is really hard for a lot of people. And living in a society where faith is a lot of the time looked at as something that's kind of silly and something to be brushed aside, it can be hard to deal with your doubts when it comes to faith. And I definitely understand that feeling. So I really wanted to talk about my story when it comes to faith, my journey, and really just share with you guys where I was and where I'm at now and where I'm going. So let's get into it. So I grew up Orthodox, and what that means is that I grew up keeping all of the laws that are laid out in the Torah. Now, the Torah actually has two parts. It has the written Torah and the oral Torah, which was written down later. And I grew up modern Orthodox. So modern Orthodox believes that you should be part of the secular world and also keep all of the Jewish laws. You're not trying to keep yourself apart in the same way as many more ultra-Orthodox groups do. Now, do I judge people who are ultra-Orthodox? No, that's a totally different story, and I just happen to grow up modern Orthodox. I like the secular world, I like what it has to offer, and I like that we can learn from each other. But in any case, I did grow up modern Orthodox, and I went to Jewish day schools growing up. I lived in a Jewish community.
So in case you don't know, this is Ben Shapiro's sister. And this whole idea of my Jewish faith story, that is as unusual way for Jews to talk as you can get. This feels very much like a story in a video produced for an overwhelmingly Christian audience. Jews do not speak this way. My faith story is the most Goyish concept around. Not criticizing Abby here, I'm just translating it. She is, I think, translating her Jewish journey, which wasn't, I would suspect, not primarily about faith, but she is presenting it in a way that's most accessible to Christians.
And I kept everything that I was supposed to. I kept kosher, I kept Shabbos. I really truly believed in God, and I've always believed in God. I've had that strong connection with my Creator really this entire time. That's never really wavered, but I was much more engaged with the Jewish community growing up because I was a part of it. I was going to Jewish day schools where I had a dual.
So Abby is a singer, and there is a law in traditional Judaism that a woman does not sing in front of a man because it is lewd, so that women should not sing in front of an audience that includes men. And so Abby wanted to pursue her singing. As long as she wanted to be a singer, then being an Orthodox Jew was just not going to be a good fit.
Dual curriculum. Half of it was Hebrew studies and half of it was English studies. I went to synagogue on Sabbath. Shabbat is the Hebrew word for that. And so I was really keeping everything. I was pretty strict with my own modesty. I only wore skirts that covered the knee. I only wore shirts that covered my shoulder and were actually a bit longer than.
So when you convert to Orthodox Judaism as a female, particularly through a traditional Beit Din Jewish law court, you will most likely throw away pants. So you will only wear skirts in public. So traditional Orthodox Jewish women do not wear pants in public.
Than that, I didn't really wear anything that was more than a few inches lower than my collarbone.
So there was this one Orthodox Jewish woman who wrote to a leading rabbi and said, "Is it permitted to wear pants when I go skiing?" And he replied, "What's an Orthodox Jewish woman doing skiing?"
I was pretty strict about my standards of modesty, and I was living at home. I mean, I was in middle school and high school, so I was definitely living a much more Orthodox lifestyle. Then when I went to college, I was still observant, but it was an entirely different experience for me. I had never really been in a situation where I was completely surrounded by people who were secular, where my only social interaction was people who were secular, who didn't believe in God. Some of them were Christian, but there was no Jewish community on campus that was Orthodox. That was really like keeping Shabbos and keeping kosher. That wasn't something that really existed on USC's campus. There was a Chabad, which is like an outreach program, but again, there weren't very many Orthodox Jews on USC's campus. Now, UCLA has a huge Orthodox Jewish community. It's a running joke in LA that there's a rivalry between USC and UCLA. Well, UCLA did have the positive that it did have an Orthodox Jewish community, whereas USC didn't. I did live at home, so that did make things a lot easier because I could go home every night and I was still keeping kosher at home and I was still keeping Shabbos with my parents and with my family. So that really did help, just living at home during that period. but my entire social circle didn't keep Sabbath and didn't keep kosher. And so that made things really hard. Now, the other really big part of it was that I am an opera singer. So I was supposed to be performing on Friday nights and Saturday nights and Sunday nights. And the Jewish Sabbath goes from sundown on Friday to an hour after sundown on Saturday. And there are a lot of restrictions about what you're able to do on that day because it should be a true day of rest. So it made things complicated when I couldn't really perform on Friday nights, or if I did, I would have to sleep down there. It was very hard. The nice thing about opera is that you don't have to perform with microphones, and you're not really allowed to use electricity on Shabbos. So I didn't have that issue, but there were a lot of other issues that came up where there were some Friday nights where they asked me to perform, and I said I wouldn't perform. I wasn't comfortable with it, and it just made things very difficult for me. Now, I will say, for the most part, USC was very understanding about that, and they really did try and work with me on it, but it was something that I kind of knew in the back of my head that it was going to come up and come up and come up throughout the course of my opera career, that I would have to perform on Friday nights. And was I comfortable with that? Because that was my Sabbath. And even though there were sort of loopholes that I could use to do it, it was something that I really struggled with because as I got older and as I wanted to be a mother, I didn't necessarily want to be away from my children on our day of rest. So this was something I was really struggling with while I was at USC, which, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned is University of Southern California, but it didn't shake the core of my faith. I was really comfortable with being Orthodox. It was a little tricky for me, but I was okay with what I was doing, and I still had that really...
So I just read an interesting academic paper last week, which I shared with you, and normally we think about people's religiosity then shapes their sex life, but this paper made the argument that people's desires for their sex life tend to shape their religiosity, and I think this latter argument may be much more accurate, that if you want promiscuity, you, generally speaking, are not going to be religious, and if you want promiscuity and are religious, then you're going to be a freak. So for several years, I wanted promiscuity and religiosity, and naturally I was a freak. So no normal Orthodox Jew wants to be sexually promiscuous. And if you are, you usually tend to destroy your future prospects in the community. So it seems like monogamy is a natural fit for Abby. So now that she's married, and I would assume she's going to have children, then Orthodox Judaism is going to be an increasingly attractive option. But for people, say, who are doing a PhD, people who are, working their way through law school, they're probably not going to get married until they're 30 or so. And so they generally don't want to be chaste all through their 20s. And so they screw around quite a bit before they get married. So on the other hand, if you just want to bang, you're unlikely to settle down for a religious life. So we've got Dooovid coming on the show here in a minute. So let me just play a little bit more here from Abby.
Strong belief in God, Shapiro. And I enjoyed observing the laws. So it wasn't a huge problem until I got to New York. So New York was the big game changer when it came to my faith journey. When I got to New York, I auditioned for the opera at my school, at Manhattan School of Music, and I was immediately offered a main role in the opera, which was really hard to do as a first year entering Manhattan School of Music.
So it's a lot easier to stay monogamous if you don't have options. And it's a lot easier to stay religious if you don't have options. But if you're talented and intelligent, then the world can just start to open up for you. And what you're hearing here from Classically Abby is that the world was just opening up to her. She had so many options that makes it a lot more difficult to be Torah observant, as opposed to someone who just settles down and works in life insurance or as a landlord.
Almost never happens. And so when I was offered that role, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is the whole reason I came to New York. But I got the call that I had to perform on Friday night. And at this point, I really hadn't performed on Friday nights yet. So this was a big step and a big choice for me. Did I want to take the role? Did I want to stay at this grad program where I was never going to be able to perform if I didn't perform on Friday nights? And so I made the decision at that point that I was going to perform on Friday nights. I was going to work on every loophole. I walked to every rehearsal because I wasn't allowed to get in a car. That's like...
Okay, so almost every Jew who gets the opportunities that Abby received is usually going to compromise on their Yiddishkeit to take advantage of these opportunities. Okay, Dooovid, have you heard anything that you want to comment on?
Yeah, that was a very interesting video, and is that actually Ben Shapiro's sister?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't even know that, and I didn't have a chance to watch that. But some of the topics that I'd mentioned about there basically being a mechanism within Jewish law that Orthodox Jews, we go with winners, and so you have stories like that. It's like, well, if it worked out good, like you did it for the Jews and it was okay, and if it worked out bad, it's probably because like you were a sinner the whole time, because there's a certain result-based understanding to Judaism. Besides all the context we've been talking about for years, just like what is identity, what does identity mean? What is it? Just like me and Luke, like we're Orthodox Jews. Ben Shapiro, there's Peter Beinart, would be just like Luke, just like I'm an Orthodox Jew, and like that's my story. I'm sticking to it. And so like obviously, there's a lot of people that view what Orthodoxy means quite a bit different, but at the same time, you're like, I'm an Orthodox Jew. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. And for the framework, I'd say like a bigger understanding of Judaism has to require the person to see the world in a way that's bigger than ourselves. So you say, yes, Judaism demands multiple sects, taking multiple approaches, and the success of Judaism on the whole depends on all of them. But internally, as a sectarian battle, could get pretty bloody, God forbid. And, so like if you're Haredi, it has to be, God forbid, that if your kid doesn't want to do the stuff anymore, like you really got to disown them. And saying like, God forbid, that's the case, that scenario, someone's Haredi kid and didn't want to continue and came into trouble with their family, and their family was like, yes, the tradition is important enough. If you don't continue it, I don't care what kind of success or millions or whatever you make or do it for yourself, but like you're not one of us anymore. You're done. But Judaism necessitates a sect like that to exist. From a perspective of the law, there has to be a sect out there that takes the law that seriously, that God forbid they're going to forsake even their own kid. But that's not going to be your mainstream Judaism. And there is leeway for interdenominational shifting. And you say, okay, if it's your average person, say, okay, they're not going to have the options to be famous among the Goyim. God forbid, like not every Orthodox Jew who leaves Orthodoxy moves on to become famous among the Goyim. And God forbid, it's probably a minority. However, within Orthodoxy, there's always that mechanism of, if you're famous among the Goyim, there's a way that you could leverage that to the benefit of the community. And if you wanted to look at it from a technical religious level, like obviously everybody connects the Jews and money, and there's plenty of stuff within Judaism to make that connection. And just to look at Judaism, it's just a pro-business religion. You have morals and
come right back to you, Dooovid. But Donald Trump was holding a press conference, and he got whisked out of the press conference because there was a shooter near the White House, and that shooter has been shot. And Trump is back doing his press conference. Reporter asked him,
have a full rattled. Side of the premises, the wall, the as you know, the fencing, especially the new fencing that they put up, is very powerful. But it was on the outside of the White House. Okay, and they'll have a full report. Secret Service in a little while will have a full report.
Are you rattled by this at all, Mr. President?
I don't know. Do I seem rattled? It's unfortunate that this is a world, but the world's always been a dangerous place. It's not something that's unique. The world has been, you look back over the centuries, the world has been a dangerous place, very dangerous place, and it will continue, I guess. Shooting outside of the White House and seems to be very well under control. I'd like to thank the Secret Service for doing their always quick and very effective work. But there was an actual shooting. and somebody's been taken to the hospital. I don't know the condition of the person. It seems that the person was shot by Secret Service. So we'll see what happens. And yeah, did you have something?
Do you have details about the shooting? Were they charged?
No, there are no details. We just found out just now. It was outside of the White House, this area right over here. And they'll have details for you in a little while. Somebody is taken to the hospital. It seems.
So Trump was abruptly pulled out of the press conference.
Excuse me?
God forbid.
And the press conference was locked down.
All right. So the president just started his news conference. And
Where they're going.
Okay. So there was a gunshot right outside the White House, and someone was shot. And for a while there, the entire press corps was locked in. Okay, so we'll continue to monitor that story. And,
did you want to play that clip I sent you?
Classically Abby here.
Another part of the electricity thing. I wouldn't use any electronics when I was there. I couldn't really write down with a pencil. I was really keeping as much of the law as I could, but I really wanted to perform. And that was the first step of me feeling really shaky with my faith. Now, that was only part of it, because my belief in God at that point.
Now, this isn't really to do with her faith. It's to do with opportunities and her observance level. So Abby is translating Jewish language into language that is more accessible and relatable to Christians. So Jews would not talk about this as being a crisis of faith.
Point didn't change. I had a really good relationship with God. I felt very strong about my relationship with him. I felt very strong about my relationship.
And it's extraordinarily rare to hear Jews talk about their personal relationship with God. This is much more of a Christian thing. So Abby has either been substantially influenced by Christianity or she's playing to her Christian audience. But normally no Orthodox Jew would speak this way.
With observance. I understood that I was sort of playing a little bit fast and loose with the rules, but I was trying my best, my very, very best, to avoid breaking any of the laws that really, really mattered. And it wasn't until I was living on the Upper West Side in New York, and I was trying to be a part of the Jewish community there, which is a lot of singles, and I ended up dating a couple of really bad guys. And that, I think, was the beginning of me wanting to take a step back from my observance. And it was a big mistake.
So the novelist Herman Wouk was an Orthodox Jew. He died, I think, in the past year. And in his 1950s classic called Marjorie Morningstar, this nice Jewish girl, just before she has sex for the first time with a non-Jew. So it's her first time having sex, and it just so happens that the partner is a non-Jew. But just before that, she eats non-kosher for the first time. She eats treif. So one avera, one sin leads to another. Okay, Dooovid, anything you've heard you want to comment on?
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about Trump some, but just, first on the point, usually the biggest dividing line when you could tell, like someone, you're not really Orthodox, is, God forbid, sexual purity. And to say that, within the Orthodox circles, the expectation is the vast, vast majority of the people are maintaining proper sexual purity. So when a person starts entering modern Orthodoxy and you're among, so to say, the Goyim, the non-Orthodox Jews, where the people maintaining sexual purity might be just a fraction of the population, 10, 20% of the people, that, so she's like, it's the primrose path of Orthodoxy to, did you take the opportunity, or did you want to indulge in the pleasures, so to say, of the Goyim, that there was no reason for you to, and was basically, the path of sin that everybody takes, the temptation, I forget there's different codifications, but the eye see, the heart's desire, and the limbs carry out. And that's the path of everybody. But that was, I was saying the last week, there's so many things within the Orthodox system to keep you there. So it's like, even if you're God forbid, a horrible sinner, if you could still, you might still be able to go to synagogue. You might still be able to pray regularly. You might still be able to go to Sabbath meals, and so on and so on. And relatively, that's not a bad thing. It's supposed to be that way. That's why I stress, like, not embarrassed to say hypocrisy is not a high crime in Judaism. So it's like, you're a sinner. Why are you coming to synagogue? That's not that way. So you're a sinner. I'm glad you came to synagogue, because even though you're a sinner, it's still good that you come to synagogue. So Orthodox Judaism might really be quite unique in that way. And it might be related to, we're saying, why Orthodox Jewish men are so successful at business, or even Orthodox Jewish women. And it's saying this was yesterday, the Trump, I guess his wealthy Syrian friend, who in all reality, in pure capital probably has much more money than Trump, who, God forbid, died of COVID-19. But, like a fundraiser, Trump is definitely getting millions of dollars for this. And the rabbis do a blessing, basically the exact way of the interfaith that Shapiro talked about the other day. And that was kind of what I was saying, like, this is about money and power. It's not like about like, some public liberalism at an interfaith. Like, President Trump is getting blessed. And if you're an Orthodox Syrian kid, you probably believe that blessing that Trump got yesterday actually just saved his life. That, God forbid, like, whoever just tried to, maybe kill the president, God forbid, could have succeeded, except that, Trump got blessed by these rabbis yesterday. And that, like you're saying, because that's a superstitious mind. You're saying that there are scholars like Shapiro, there are people who really understand the Rambam. But, the typical practitioner of a religion, generally has a superstitious mind, and that's the role of the law. And just like Sabbath, saying, like, okay, if Shapiro's sister just kept Sabbath, like, that was probably enough to keep her in line with her Judaism. God forbid, like, sins have consequences. So it's a interesting dynamic, and it's probably, related to what we're going to talk about why Judaism creates successful business people.
Okay, great. Come back to you in a minute. Let me go back here to classically Abby.
Because I think I could have found comfort in God in those moments, but instead I blamed God and Judaism for making those men bad. Now, this is a very, very big problem. Relating a religion with one person's practice of it doesn't make sense, because these two men said that they were Jewish and were practicing and were Orthodox, but were not really living it out. And that was the big difference.
So here's the big red flag for me here is that if you start dating really bad men, I don't know if Abby's going to deal with this, but it probably has less to do with Hashem and these particular men than with you, right? The people that you attract into your life reflect who you are. So I'm curious if Abby does any introspection or self-reflection on that point.
Orthodox Judaism isn't just about rituals. It's not just about laws, which are incredibly important, but it's also about having an ethical and moral basis so that those rituals and laws deepen your faith and deepen your practice. And when these two guys said they were Orthodox Jews, I just believed them. And that was the big problem, because the fact is, even if you're keeping Shabbos and...
Okay, so this seems to me like rationalization after the fact. Like, no Orthodox Jew who has any seichel, any sense, thinks that anyone else who claims to be an Orthodox Jew is therefore a righteous person. But she dated some bad boys, and so far, no introspection on herself, why she was attracted to bad boys.
Kosher, but you're a bad person? That doesn't make you an Orthodox Jew.
Okay, if she was dating bad people, that's because large parts of her were bad and wanted to be with bad people.
You're ignoring the base of what everything else is built on. And I couldn't comprehend that at the time. And I was so upset that I had dated these two bad guys, that I had been put in bad positions.
Okay, so she wants to blame everyone but herself. So she's so upset, but she doesn't want to look at her own decision-making and why she was so drawn to bad people. You don't have bad people in your life and start going out with them and making them a part of your life unless you're pretty bad yourself.
that I decided to take a step back from my faith. Now, I knew that I always wanted to marry a Jew. I knew.
And again, having an Orthodox Jew talk about taking a step back from my faith, this is the most goyish talk possible. No normal Jew would talk this way. Not even a Reform or Conservative Jew. Let alone an Orthodox Jew would never talk about taking a step back from my faith. It's do you observe or do you don't observe?
Knew I wanted to raise my children Orthodox. So what's funny is that when I did that, it really didn't change kind of that base level of I still believe in God, I still believe in Orthodox Judaism, but I just couldn't practice it at that moment. And also at that time, I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that God can still love you even if you're not practicing every single thing, as long as you're still making a journey toward being more faithful, being.
This is incredibly goyish. This is incredibly Christian. No Jew talks about whether or not God loves him and whether God still loves him. This is the most un-Jewish talk by someone raised in Orthodox Judaism, so she knows what I'm talking about if she ever listens to this. I'm someone who grew up the son of a Christian theologian, so she is giving Christian talk. Jews don't talk this way. Not even secular or Reform Jews talk this way. So she's either internalized a Christian outlook on the world, or she is playing to her Christian audience. Dooovid, any thoughts?
Yeah, sorry, I muted myself there. Yeah, it's what I say, the refrain I say all the time, like, and even Rabbi Ruvain, is she's an Orthodox Jew. Like, that means she knows that she can't sin and get away with it. There's no such thing. Like, there's no scenario where, you sin and get away with it. Sometimes, like, you sin and, it works out that you did so much for the Jewish people that, you're largely judged in favor, but it didn't mean the person sinned and got away with it. There is no such thing. So, you're right. She's using Christian concepts that completely belie her story of orthodoxy, but it doesn't matter. Like, from the Shapiro point of view, it's like, okay, she could have an incorrect understanding of Jewish theology. The important thing is she in a state of obeying the law? And how much does being in the state of being in obedience of the law cause a person to have general good behavior and avoid sin in general? That the person, is it possible that a person was keeping all the laws and would then start sinning just because someone badly influenced them? Or is it like the Primrose Pass, to say, like, she's like, no, I'm Orthodox. I asked my father who I should marry. I asked the rabbi, who do you think, and it's saying, like, no, there's 0% chance that that's going to happen. But to say that she's like, no, I'm going to use the principles of feminism, not the traditional principles of orthodoxy. But that's, the irony that, Dooovid and Luke are kind of pointing out, where at the end of the day, it's like, I'm an Orthodox Jew. That's my story. I'm sticking to it.
More observant, being more religious. And so when I took that step back and said, I can't do this right now, I felt like I had to pull away from God too, even though that wasn't the case. I could have kept my relationship with God and said, okay, I need to take a step back right.
This is so goyish. No Jew talks about pulling away from God or my relationship with God. This is purely Christian talk. This is incredibly weird to hear this from someone who came from Orthodox Judaism, went to Orthodox Jewish day schools, and apparently wants to live pretty close to an Orthodox Jew, yet she is talking purely Christian rhetoric.
Right now, but I'm planning on
No,
coming
because she's
back.
talking to
That
Goyim,
is
though,
part
right?
of the
This
plan.
video was
I
addressed
just
to
felt
Goyim.
simply too guilty to still engage with God. It was a small period of time where I really just didn't relate to God at all. I didn't talk to him. I didn't pray because I just felt like I don't deserve to. I have not done right by him. And that's wrong.
And again, Jews don't talk this way. They don't talk personally. It's like, oh, I don't deserve to talk to God because I have not done right by him. I've never heard an Orthodox Jew speak this way.
I made a huge mistake when I did that because God loved me anyways.
I never hear Orthodox Jews talk about God loves me. This is Christian talk.
He loved that I was trying and struggling and working to be a better person. So that was something that I learned after the fact, that, oh my gosh, I still have a great relationship with God right now.
And it's exceedingly rare to hear any Jew talk about their relationship with God. This is purely Christian talk.
Even though I'm not perfectly observant, even though I'm not even close to perfectly observant. And that makes me want to become more religious, want to become more observant, because my relationship with God is not based on discipline or fear in the same way. For me, it's based on love. And that really helped. When I did realize...
Yeah, I've never heard of a Jew talk about his relationship with God. It's all based on love. This is Christian language. It's not Jewish language.
That this was a journey, and I am planning on becoming more observant over time. So all of this happened, and then I met my husband. And I was introduced to him, and he grew up Reform. He really wasn't keeping much of anything. But I told him when we met, even though I wasn't really keeping too much either, that it was very important to me that I become observant by the time I have children, and that I be Orthodox by the time I have children, that I marry a Jew, all of that. He was so on the same page, it was crazy. Given that he grew up Reform, I would never have known that he would be interested in even trying to become more observant, but he had been on his own faith journey, which was fascinating. I should have him.
I never hear Jews talk about their faith journey. This is Christian rhetoric. This is so bizarre coming from someone raised in Orthodox Judaism and intending to raise her family in Orthodox Judaism. You go to an Orthodox shul and start talking about your faith journey, people think you're a Christian.
Him tell his story because it's amazing. It's better than my story. And he was the one when we met that made me feel so much more confident in this decision that we can do this as a team. We're going to become observant as a team. It matters to us both. This is something we want to imbue in our children, make them love Judaism the way that I used to and the way that he wants to. And that is where we're at. That feeling of, okay, this is a journey. We are here, but we're not going to stay here. We're going to move this way and this way and this way and get closer and closer to God over time. And I wanted to address a little bit about the rituals of Judaism, because the rituals of Judaism aren't just fun magic stuff. That's not a thing. The base of Judaism is ethical and moral behavior and those rituals which deepen it and deepen your faith and deepen your connection to God and deepen your connection with your community. These two things for Orthodox Jews.
Okay, so if rituals in Orthodox Judaism deepen your connection to God and deepen your connection to community, that's wonderful, but that's not a point that is emphasized in the Masorah, in the Jewish tradition. It doesn't say, and you shall keep these commandments so that you can deepen your relationship with the community. You shall keep these commandments so that you can deepen your relationship with me. This is Christian talk. This is not something that gets an emphasis in the Jewish tradition. Dooovid, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, I didn't get your whole genre mistake there, because isn't she talking to Goyim? Doesn't she have a huge YouTube channel where probably 90% of the people who are listening is Goyim? So isn't it obvious that she would be expressing things that would be easily understandable to Goyim? I mean, it could signify her current state of belief. I mean, because at no point does anyone expect her to be a rabbinic scholar. Whatever she did, she didn't. She's not a rabbinic scholar, and so it's possible she expressed it in Christian terms. But your whole critique the whole time is what? Well, she's talking to Goyim, right?
Okay, so I talk to Goyim. 90% plus of the viewers of this show are non-Jews, but I don't adopt so wholeheartedly this Christian frame on life. So it's incredibly bizarre hearing this from an Orthodox Jew, someone raised in Orthodox Judaism, someone to return to Orthodox Judaism. This is the equivalent of an Orthodox Jew releasing an album of Christmas music.
No, I mean, I can't imagine that. You're right. I mean, one thing, this is probably the best video she's ever done. I never even watched any of her videos. This is the first one, but I would guess this is probably unquestionably the best video she's ever produced. I mean, are you disagreeing?
I have no idea. I've never watched any of her videos. I have no criticism of her. I'm just noting that it's incredibly weird to hear someone rooted in Orthodox Judaism, educated in Orthodox Judaism, went to Orthodox Jewish day schools, and plans to spend the rest of her life in Orthodox Judaism, raise her children in Orthodox Judaism, but relate her story in a way that would be incredibly off-putting to any normal Orthodox Jew. Like a Jew cannot relate to this story. This story is entirely adopting a Christian frame on things. And you can speak as an Orthodox Jew to non-Jews, but to take on the Christian framing is just weird.
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, and like I could use your, really demonstrate that your frustration or misunderstanding what happened in that you'll even agree with me at the end of what I say, because modern Orthodoxy, the average, so to say, modern Orthodox person, like she says who she is, largely portrays themselves as a goy to goyim. So they might even use a different name when they go to shul than when they work. And if they do, use a different, so to say, name, and because a lot of us took names when we came over from Europe, so almost all of our names are European in general. And, a lot of people who had Jewish sounding names changed their names largely to Anglo names. So especially modern Orthodoxy, which is, hopefully we'll get back into going into more in depth these spine theological differences and the benefits and problems with each theology. But to say like Ben Shapiro or his sister, as a typical modern Orthodox Jew, it is not surprising that they present themselves to Goyim basically as fellow Goyim. They don't present themselves like I'm Luke Ford, the Orthodox Jew. They present, if she uses whatever she calls herself, and if the person doesn't know she's Jewish, all the better, as long as doesn't and interacts on a reciprocal level in the way that they understand Goyim. I mean, do you accept that that's generally how you classify your modern Orthodox who have kind of like a dual personality?
No, I've spent thousands of hours among modern Orthodox Jews. I don't remember one ever speaking the way that she's speaking, and they can anglicize their names and they can mix with non-Jews, but I've never heard one talk about a journey of his Jewish faith. I've never heard one talk about his relationship with God. I've never heard any modern Orthodox Jew speak in this distinctly Christian terminology, in this distinctly Christian framework. Now, there may be such modern Orthodox Jews. I've never encountered one. I have no problem with what she's doing. I'm just saying that it just strikes me as strange.
When I say to me, I would almost instantly think from everything I've ever heard or known about her that this is definitely praiseworthy. Yeah, it might be interesting or strange, but no, unquestionably, that video is probably the best thing she's ever put out. I mean, I couldn't imagine, from some Jewish rabbinic thing to say no, that's probably unquestionably the most kosher video she's ever made.
Right. I have no idea how kosher or unkosher other videos are. I have no criticism to make of her. I'm just noting my reaction, which is this is completely bizarre to me as a convert to Orthodox Judaism, coming from a background in Christianity.
Go hand in hand. You have to do both to really reach your potential as an Orthodox Jew. And a really good example of this is prayer. Prayer is something that teaches us to be more ethical and moral. Like the prayer over food for Jews, we do that not because God needs it. He doesn't need our prayer.
Any other one.
In the teaching
However, your
of
inclination
prayer in the Jewish tradition, it doesn't put this big emphasis on this will make you more ethical and moral. This is kind of a new spin on things, and it doesn't effectively. When someone becomes an Orthodox Jew, they don't tend to become more moral, more ethical, more law-abiding, more kind, more compassionate. It generally speaking, I have not seen it tend to make a difference in people's ethical behavior.
But because we need it. We need to be taught to be grateful and to recognize everything that we've been given and recognize that we didn't do it ourselves. That is a huge part.
Non-Jewish quality, and that
I don't recall in the Masorah, in the Talmud, in the ongoing rabbinic commentary that, and when you do these prayers, they will teach you to be grateful, and they will teach you to be more ethical.
Orthodoxy. And another good example is kosher laws. Kosher laws are a little bit of a question in the Torah. Why do we have these laws? And there's a lot of different people who come up with reasons for them.
And from an Orthodox
in the Masorah, the Jewish tradition, it pays very little attention to reasons for the laws. Very, very, very little attention.
The one that I
but that's
love
the point
is when you're talking about mixing meat and dairy.
I don't care that you read a
Judaism
book
feels very strongly about not mixing life and death.
We
Those
follow
are
our
two very
current rabbis,
separate
and this
things.
is what they said.
And so
okay, this is a relatively modern interpretation, and it's fine, but it's just kind of out of character with the Orthodox Judaism that as I have known it, and the Orthodox Jewish tradition as I have studied it. And Dooovid, anything you want to comment on?
Yeah, so that part about just the first step of acknowledging that modern Orthodox Jews specifically, largely portray themselves as a goy to goyim when they deal with goyim and through business or that there's elements within that aren't all the same, but there's a large portion that when their interactions with goyim, they just portray themselves or prefer to be perceived as just a fellow goy. And I'm not sure if you were rejecting that there's not a sizable proportion of the modern Orthodox community with their interaction with goyim, at least from their personal level, see themselves as basically a goy interacting with other goyim, and they prefer their Judaism not to come up or maybe not even be noticed.
Yeah, I don't think that modern Orthodox Jews see themselves as goyim. I think that's completely contrary to all of my life experience. Now, just because you don't want your Judaism to come up in every interaction doesn't mean that you perceive yourself as goyim. So it would be weird to be introducing your Judaism into interactions that have nothing to do with Judaism. And so I've not seen modern Orthodox Jews, especially if they're not wearing anything distinctly Jewish, they do tend to blend in, but they certainly don't think of themselves as non-Jews, in my experience. Is that based on your experience, or is that based on your supposition, Dooovid?
Yeah, because I would say when a person becomes, at the full new neo-wave of the Bali Tshuva movement, and people that move back to Israel, they're going to drop their Anglo name. You're going to say, yes, you are a goy. You have a goyish name. And I'm talking okay, there may not be that many Jewish Fords out there, but saying your average modern Orthodox Jew bears goyish last names and even goyish names in the business, and it's saying that's understandable. That's according to Jewish law, because we're going to get into hopefully in detail, if not today, how Jewish law promotes getting ahead and succeeding and actually literally monetary success. And the way is, should I go by Dooovid or David? And if my name was Yankel, should I go by Jake? And if my name were Baruch, should I go by Bernard? And there's a reason that, Baruch becomes Bernard. Like most Jews, when they change their names, they, in America, they chose Anglo names. My guess would be probably 90% of Jews that largely came from Eastern European origins, if they changed their name in America, chose Anglo names as first and second names. Even today, I would guess that the majority, so to say, Jews that don't take English, Hebrew names, but that fine element of the point where no longer, is Luke Ford. Luke Ford becomes Ephraim. Just like I'm tired of people calling me Luke Ford. That does not feel like who I am. That's an identity I use to interact with the goyim, and so who I am is Levi. Call me Levi. And you say, okay, you may never experience that, but you think if you were in Jerusalem for a few years, and you had your Orthodox family, that you would be at a certain point, you wouldn't be Luke anymore, you would be Levi.
Oh yeah, immediately. I mean, in much of Orthodox Jewish life, I'm Levi. I'm not Luke. But even when I'm Luke, I never think of myself as a goy. And even when modern Orthodox Jews, they may be named Jake Smith or Pete Brown, but they still, in my experience, don't think of themselves as goys. They've just taken on a name that's appropriate to the society that they live in. Okay, let me play this clip here of President Trump being called up to the podium and receiving a blessing by several Sephardic rabbis.
We have very, very esteemed holy men sitting in the front row here. They would like to pray for you and make a blessing on you. If I can call you up, and our rabbis would give you a very brief blessing.
Okay, Dooovid, do you want to add any commentary to this video?
Yeah, so if you're, so to say, like a superstitious Orthodox Jew, like it's done, it's decided. You know what I'm saying? Like, is Trump good or bad for the Jews? Like, if you're, according to, so to say, our superstition, it's like our rabbis said our blessings over the man, his face right in front of us. Like, it's done. Like, there's no question about Trump. Like, Trump is our guy. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's true. It just means that Trump went to, it was probably his friends, some people he knew, and gave him large sums of money. And he was like, yeah, whatever, say your mantra. I don't care. If you want to pay me tens of millions of dollars to say your, God forbid, stupid mantra, feel free. And he might do that with Hindus and all sorts of people, and that wouldn't surprise me. But if you're a Jew who believes in the prayers, like, that's extremely significant. And say especially the tendency to be superstitious. Like, I remember when Ivanka Trump went to the grave of the Rebbe, and actually I remember that very clearly, if someone looked it up, is that President Trump also was, God forbid, almost assassinated the day after Ivanka Trump almost went to the Rebbe. I think he was in Las Vegas, and I mean, it wasn't really close, but some guy tried to attack him. Maybe he had a gun, maybe he didn't, but like, it was also in the news. Secret Service stopped him, and it was like, within a day or something of Ivanka Trump going to the Rebbe, which I guess was pretty close to the election. Anyways, and it also was kind of goes what I'm saying, like, that's not interfaith. You're saying, like, as Jews, we have kind of like an obligation to kind of elites and money and through business, and saying that actually in larger orthodoxy, like you say, like, no, interfaiths, we don't do them, it's forbidden. They're believed to be counterproductive, and business deals actually represent a stronger tie of community infinity. And so if it's this man that was a Stanley, God forbid, the Syrian man who died of COVID-19, who, from my understanding, was actually substantially wealthier in pure dollar amounts than the president himself, and is saying, so like President Trump, like, like, he doesn't really care. I mean, God forbid, I'm not saying he's a disrespectful man, but I'm saying, like, he knows, like, okay, that's your superstition, and his buddy was the billionaire. And I think from a Jewish perspective, you always have to say Goyim are never going to care about the rabbis. That's why you could use the word Goyim. And say, okay, was Shapiro's sister speaking to the Goyim? And it's just, like, the Goyim are never going to care to speak to your rabbi. But the Goyim will listen to Ben Shapiro's sister. That's what I'm saying, Ben Shapiro's sister. There's, God forbid, millions and millions of Goyim who know exactly who she is. And so, there's the interesting dynamic that now she's becoming Orthodox, and she herself will have to care what the rabbis say. But the Goyim who listen to her are never really going to care what her rabbi has to say, or they're not, like she could try like, and this is my rabbi, and like everyone's going to tune out.
Okay, great. So you sent me an essay on Talmudic money-making secrets. It's written by a Jewish billionaire, Hershey H. Friedman. Writes here about how to get rich according to the Talmud. Unlike the Christian Bible, which is largely dismissive of wealth and the wealthy, the attitude of the Hebrew Bible and the Talmud towards wealth is quite positive, since it enables one to help others. God blesses those that use their wealth to help the poor. Wealth, peace, and a long life are rewards from God for obeying his laws. There is nothing wrong with enjoying one's wealth in a modest, unostentatious manner. And there is a Talmudic view that one will be punished for not indulging in all permissible pleasures. The Talmud stresses the dignity of honest work. Rav told Rabbi Kahana, flay a carcass in the street and earn a wage, and do not say, I am a great person and this job is degrading to me. There is no occupation which can disappear from the world. All are useful and important. The world requires both perfumers and tanners. Fortunate is he whose occupation is that of a perfumer, and woe to him who works as a tanner. I think there's also Talmudic saying here that it's better to flay a carcass in the street and earn a wage than to take charity. Sages of the Talmud worked at many diverse occupations. So Hillel was a woodchopper, Shammai was a builder, Abba Hilkiah was a field laborer, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was a businessman for 40 years, Abba Shaul was a grave digger, Abba Hilkiah was a field worker, Abba Oshia was a launderer, Rabbi Shimon Pikuli was a cotton dealer, Rabbi Shmuel Shilas was a school teacher, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Hananel were scribes, Rabbi Yossi B. Halafta was a tanner, and Rabbi Yochanan Ha-Sandler was a shoemaker. So here are some of the examples in the Talmud that correlate with wealth. So giving charity, the Talmud describes wealth as a reward from God, and if you give to others, God will abundantly give to you. Then being honest in business. So what should one do to become rich? Rabbi Yehoshua gave 12 answers. He says, including engage in business and deal honestly. You need honesty together with prayer. Let your fellows' money be as precious to you as your own. Honor the Sabbath. One might think that the key to wealth is working as much as possible. According to the Talmud, people who honor the Sabbath properly are rewarded with great wealth. Fulfilling the Torah. Those who honor the Torah are rewarded being an honest public servant. Acquiring wisdom. Choosing the right occupation. Being blessed with wealth by a rabbinic sage. Honoring one's wife. Talmud asserts one becomes wealthy by honoring his wife. Marrying the daughter of a priest, a Kohen. Living a simple, ostentatious life filled with humility. The Talmud frowns on flaunting wealth. Conspicuous displays of excessive wealth can lead one to arrogance. Showing off one's wealth is inconsistent with Jewish law. Has many negative side effects. It makes one conspicuous and arouses the envy of others, including the enemies of the Jews. It can cause those who cannot afford to live a lavish life to be embarrassed by their lack of success, and it can cause arrogance. It can cause the evil eye. Not living in Babylon is another tip if you want to remain wealthy. And then whoever inspects his property every day will find a monetary blessing. Some more business advice from the Talmud. Sell your wares while the sand is still on your feet, so do not procrastinate about selling, and diversify your assets. So those are some of the money-making tips from the Talmud. Okay, Dooovid, any thoughts?
Yeah, so my greater views on this are largely controversial, I guess, in the sense that I have theories that, as far as I know, are not being postulated by the accepted scholars. But obviously, I'm framing things kind of like Ben Shapiro's sister in a way that's kind of like Trump speak for Goyim, like I'm explaining Jewish concepts in Trump speak for Goyim. so to say. But Judaism has to have this: we only honor, venerate sages and the rabbis. There's nobody within the tradition that makes it into the tradition. God forbid, martyrs or few heroes, or few extremely wealthy people, but they had to, like Rothschild or Montefiore, that were really able to alter the course of history. We only tell stories about rabbis, and but because there's also the principle where hypocrisy is not really that negative of a thing. Like, okay, hypocrisy is not good, but it's not like end all. So it's like, oh, you're being hypocritical. It's like, like, so what? I'm making money off of it, or something like that. It's just like, you're like, what are you, goy or something? But within that framework, there's a 2-tier track of Judaism. When you're talking about Judaism seriously, you're not talking about business, and that you're never gonna be able to buy your way into being a sage. It's impossible. There's no way to do it. However, once you get to the track where it's saying, like, I'm not going to be from the sages, there's a dual track of, so to say, Judaism for, the businessmen. And then you have a factual element that Jewish law actually changes and adapts to business practice. That, being profitable with the goyim is actually an acceptable reason to change aspects of Jewish law. So we're saying, just without question, it's not even like a question. The Jewish law specifically, it's like shaving. Like, can you shave? And it's like, yes, it leads me to make more money to shave. So it's like actually straight written into the Jewish law. Versus like, can you shave to be perceived better by the goyim? Jewish law probably would say, like, nah, I don't think so. And even like, can I shave so I fit in better at college? Like, at least on a more Haredi perspective, it's like, no, absolutely not. You don't shave in order that you don't fit in with those people. But in terms of money, even a Haredi person at some point would examine at what level, how much money and how much is that going to weigh in terms of benefit to the larger community, to Jewish law. And I don't know if, Luke, if you would agree that, like, Jewish law actually has a mechanism in it that values, like, how much money and how much can we bend, based on how much money.
Well, Jewish law certainly takes money into consideration. It's going to be much more flexible with enforcement of certain of the dietary laws, for example, if you have fewer resources. But what are you referring to specifically?
Well, I'm referring to, like, first of all, you don't realize that you already need, so to say, a heter just to call yourself Luke, not Levi. Saying, what's your, like saying, from like a pure, like, Judeo perspective, if you were like within a Haredi world, and saying, like, I do not take any guy who calls himself Luke seriously talking about Judaism, because, like, why would he be calling himself Luke? And so that aspect is like, dude, like, haven't you been to Los Angeles? Like, you're understanding a scenario, like, in the streets of Jerusalem, people may not even know the name Luke, or they might never even have heard of Hollywood. And thank God there's a lot of people in Jerusalem that never heard of Hollywood, even though some of their cousins are probably big there. And but all of these various levels of almost everything that we did, like, can we call ourselves by a name that's in essence a false indicator of who we are? And like Jewish law, like, is it venerable when you meet someone who's still like a Yankee, whatever, and you say, like, you're more praiseworthy than I am, because I present myself with a non-Jewish name. You're more proud and stand by your Judaism, that you don't mind coming to the goyim, with payas in a Yiddish name. And from the perspective of the person that does that, everything less than that is a concession that someone made, and you need an excuse for it. But the excuse of making money is actually a very powerful excuse within Jewish law. So, in just like, well, I was doing business with the goyim. Like, of course, I adapted myself in a way that I was capable of profitably doing business with the goyim, and it creates a mechanism where being profitable is somewhat kind of like proof that it's okay. and that, God forbid, we're going to assume that the vast, vast majority of Orthodox people are largely, hopefully scrupulously honest businessmen, but at least that mechanism where the person knows, like, back in the protected culture where, saying like, are you trying to protect your fellow Orthodox Jews from what you know? You're saying, is the guy in Jerusalem who never heard of Hollywood better off for it or not? And if you're going to take that level, say like, I'm a modern Orthodox Jew, and I don't know if Ben Shapiro's sister is saying that, and she might be saying that, is she saying, thank God for the person in Jerusalem that doesn't even know where Hollywood is? Or, are you saying that like one day in Jerusalem, they're going to watch Hollywood movies?
I'm not saying anything to do with any of that, but I will say that the person who is obsessed with having a name that differentiates himself from 99% of the population, and a person who's obsessed with dressing in a way that differentiates himself from 99% of the population, and a person who is obsessed with differentiating himself from 99% of the population, I suspect that that person is not also obsessed with being honest in business. I suspect that person, in my experience, is not usually obsessed with being a decent human being. I suspect that person, in my experience, is not usually obsessed with obeying the law. That person is not usually obsessed with paying his taxes honestly. So these freaky people who want to differentiate themselves, they choose to live in the United States of America, but then try to throw up as many barriers between themselves and their fellow citizens, make it as difficult as possible to interact with them for the majority of the population. Almost never, in my experience, are these people of particularly decent character. Never do they get obsessed with developing their own character. Never do they get obsessed with being a mensch and with being a kind and honest person. Never do they get obsessed with obeying the laws of the land. So these freaks who choose to live in the United States of America, and they will justify it by, oh, I can just make more money here. And then they try to put up as many barriers between themselves and the non-Jews in an as obnoxious and showy way as possible. In my experience, rarely, if ever, are these people honest. Rarely, if ever, are these people upright. Rarely, if ever, do these people obey the law. Rarely, if ever, do these people pay their taxes honestly. Rarely, if ever, are these people overall decent, kind, upstanding citizens who give Jews a bad name. Instead, in my experience, these people tend to be cheats. They tend to be lies. They tend to deal disrespectfully with the non-Jews. They tend to make Jews and Judaism and God stink in the eyes of everyone who interacts with them. And at the same time, they can delude themselves that they're incredibly righteous because they've thrown up all these barriers between themselves and the non-Jews, and they take pride in being as obnoxious as possible with regard to the non-Jews. These people strike me as generally quite mentally unbalanced, and they seem, in many of their dealings, to be quite evil. So that's my anecdotal impression.
God forbid. I mean, like, unfortunately, I've heard worse, but, God forbid, and saying, like, no, I largely like Gariépy and would say that their honesty level is, relative ethic level, I mean, is relatively probably higher than most Americans, although not perfect. And as I said, definitely the instrumental value of truth. And a certain level is, let Luke Ford go collect a prize for honesty, and you're saying like, no, we go with winners, we go with what works, and you're saying like, no, we will take Ben Shapiro and his sister back into the fold, and let them call themselves Orthodox, and you could be a critic from the sidelines, like enjoy, God forbid, I remember very clearly, like I heard from Chaim Lach's of blessed memory, hat Geld oder nicht. You either have money or you don't. You could be as bitter as you want that you don't have money, but you either have it or you don't. And that's a fact. And like, I don't mind that you're bitter. And no, I mean, he just said that. I just heard the one line, have money, you either have money or you don't. That's not the context, but he's just a man who had money to, put it in that expression. You either have money or you don't. And I don't care that you're bitter and don't like me. I would probably be bitter and not like me if I were you too. Good luck. I appreciate your hatred. Thank you. Good luck. And it's okay, so what? Maybe that's what I believe. So what? Like, I'll see you on the battlefield. I don't want to see you on the battlefield, but yes, maybe this is what I believe. And if we got to see each other on the battlefield, God forbid, God forbid. And you're saying, like, welcome to New York. And I saw that video a few weeks ago, where there's like all these fireworks go off, and the person calls the cops, and there's like, the streets, they're going crazy, and the cop actually says, welcome to New York. And you're like that's certainly, like that's how it is. New York is a tough place, and Haredim excel, somehow in that very tough place. And they do it largely through our ancestral tradition of being moneylenders. And the Ashkenazic rabbinic tradition generally represents the fact that we were moneylenders, and it's clearly written into our law that there's, I don't care Luke Ford's complaints. If someone writes a check, that might make a difference. But like you could have 10,000 viewers, you could be Mike Enoch and all those guys put together begging chump change, and I value one person who could actually write a check more than that.
Okay, so you don't care about my complaints about unethical behavior among Orthodox Jews, but I tell you what, if God forbid tens of thousands of Jews get thrown into a pit of death once again because of the bad behavior of Jews, then maybe some people will care. If screwing over the outsider, screwing over the non-Jew, if practicing dishonest business, if having contempt for the society that houses you, if subverting society's standards for minimal levels of education for your kids, if practicing essentially thievery to line your pockets, and eventually people respond to that, and they respond to that in the harshest ways, such as throwing Jews into a pit of death, then maybe some people will care. There are reasons that people hate groups, and some of these reasons are exaggerated based on reality, and some of these are absolutely applicable. So people who like Jews, generally speaking, have positive experiences with Jews. But if Jews behave in a bad way, then non-Jews are going to respond negatively towards them. So everything that we do has repercussions. If we radiate contempt for the non-Jew, if we radiate hostility for the non-Jew, if we conduct ourselves dishonorably with the non-Jew, if we cheat the non-Jew's system, if we rejoice in how much we can get away with regarding the non-Jew, if we treat the non-Jew trivially, if we abuse his system, if we abuse his tax system, if we abuse his welfare system, if we abuse his standardized ways of doing business, there are going to be repercussions. And you may get to line your pockets, not meaning you, Dooovid, but I'm referring to a person who behaves dishonestly, whatever group you're in. You may be Jewish, you may be Armenian, you may be Greek, you may be Muslim, you may be black, whatever group you're in. You may get to line your pockets behaving dishonorably. You may get to set aside a great deal of money by cheating and stealing and lying and screwing over out-groups. But other members of your in-group, they may very well pay the price. So a person who has a bad experience with a Jew or with a black or with a Muslim or a Christian, he remembers that. And then when he has future possible interactions with members of a group that have previously screwed him over, he is going to take that into consideration. And so if your group is known as generally uplifting society, if your group is known for following society's laws, if your group is known as respecting the majority group in your society, if your group is known for wanting to get along in all possible ways, for being upright in how you do business, if your group is known for following the law, if your group is known for not screwing people over, if your group is known for following the dictates of, say, educational policy and business policy and social norms, then your group is going to be much more positively appraised by the majority. But after a certain point of time, when the majority just gets screwed over, when the majority just gets stolen from, when the majority's wishes and dictates and norms of how you conduct yourself are rejected, if the majority comes to associate your group with, say, criminality or with dishonesty or just obnoxiousness or subversion, then there can be very nasty consequences. And the people who do the subversion, the people who do the dishonesty, they may not necessarily pay the price. But we're all not just individuals. We are members of groups. And the behaviors of individuals in a group affect the reputation of the wider group. So that's my main point. Everything we do reflects on our group identity, and then there are repercussions. Dooovid, any thoughts?
Yeah, I largely agree with your greater karmatic outlines. Like, yes, you can't cheat people and get away with it. If the Jews cheat the Goyim, there will be repercussions. No Orthodox Jew believes there's no mainstream Orthodox Jewish sage that says we could sin and get away with it. There is an idea of instrumental truth, and there is an idea of doing things that are best for the Jews, but there is no concept of being able to sin and get away with it. So I'm not rejecting anything that Luke says. I will push back on the saying, what does it mean to be a Jew? And even say Luke as the convert, and he's saying, this is who we are, take it or leave it. I'm sorry, you will not define Judaism. You want to be a member, I'm sorry, this is who we are. You don't have a choice in saying like, oh, that's not the Judaism I wanted to sign up for. Like, no, these are the guys who are officially representing Judaism to President Trump. And there's no one from the outside is going to say, oh, like, that's not the Judaism I want to be part of. And it could be the opposite. You're saying like, yeah, I'm sorry, Judaism's a tough religion. God forbid, and I've heard it from big, kids of rabbis, put it in that expression, like, I am a Jew. There are hundreds of millions of people that want me dead. God forbid, God forbid, God forbid. And Luke Ford knew when he converted to Judaism that he bear that label, and it doesn't matter why there's hundreds of millions of goyim that want us dead, that he's joined the fold, and it could turn out that, oh, there's actually like a whole bunch of really, really bad Jews that just did really bad things, and there's actually no reason why someone should hate Luke Ford because this random other Jew did these really, really, really bad things. And it's like, no, I'm sorry, that's not how Judaism works. It's unfortunate, but no, that's not how Judaism works. And but yes, you can't cheat people and get away with it. And if what Luke is saying is correct, God forbid, there will be consequences. But maybe Luke is misjudging the situation. And your average person in New York says, I like my Hasidic neighbor. I'm happy with my mortgage broker. I'm happy with the deal I got on my life insurance. Like, I like my landlord. And it could be like, like this Dooovid guy, he doesn't want to be my friend. He wants to be my landlord. Like, what a jerk. Like, he comes around, he's just so mean and grumpy, but like, but he really wants me to be his tenant, so he can make more money. And it's say, God bless that man. This is America. That man is a great American. And, the ethics that Luke Ford is describing that they teach at the university does not represent America more than that Hasidic man who wants to do honest business according to our ancestral tradition of the professions we've done for thousands of years in America, and preserve our way of life and stay separate from the rest of society. And that is not an excuse for unethical business. As I said, there is nobody, who actually fears God that could even fathom saying a statement like you can sin and get away with it. It just doesn't happen. No, Luke's warning, I agree 100%. And I would like to believe that, no, your average person has pretty good experience with Orthodox Jews relatively. And Orthodox Jews, yes, we do have a system that, could be looked at like we're going to cut corners and do various things. But at the end of the day, even with all that, hopefully we're going to measure up and saying, and the Goyim will say, we're glad that the Jews were here.
Yep. Let me play a video here. This is David
It's just
Cole.
how things have to go. Same with Stalin, same with Mao. Same with Drew Pickles Dark. We're sticking with him. Do you think the Jewish community needs to take a more open approach to revisionism? Well, of course. You made me stammer. I fucking stammered because, of course, I believe that. Of course, the Jewish community needs to take a more open position of revisionism. The Jewish community is harming itself. All of the laws against revisionism, and even all the laws against denial, and all of the constant harping on it, of course, it only ends up hurting Holocaust history as a field, and it only makes the Jews look bad. Why are they doing this? And they're the worst way to prove that you're not some conspiratorial controlling octopus is to act like a conspiratorial controlling octopus. Wait, you must not write about the Holocaust. Wait, do not write of it in a way that we don't like. But I mean, now blacks have joined in. It's like, fuck. What the Jews started, and now blacks are saying you can't write anything about black history that they don't like. They don't want white people writing about black history at all. So the Jews, in time, the Jews will prove to be the least of our problems, although they started this shit. But other groups are going to carry it, carry that ball down to the goal.
Okay, let's play some Marc Shapiro here. Come on, Marc.
The most important issues of our day. We've been living through it the last 20 years, and that has to do with conversion. What is the definition of a conversion? Why is it that all of a sudden in the last 15 years, 20 years or so, less than 20, 15 years, you hear about canceling of conversions? No one ever heard of this growing up. What is a conversion? We have people from America, people in Canada. You know what it means to conversion? You go to the local rabbi in Winnipeg, San Francisco, wherever it is. He's convinced that this person coming to him wants to be a Jew. He puts together a beis din. If there's other rabbis in town, he puts together the other rabbis. If not, he gets chazan or two religious balabaktim, and they convert the person. And that's how Jews have been converted since time immemorial. Now, this idea that you have conversion courts and that chief rabbinate says you're not accepted. They don't accept your conversion if you don't go to one of the authorized conversion courts. I never understood what that means. Does that mean that they don't accept Satmar conversions, for instance, if it's an independent Satmar beis din, if the person doesn't need to fast on Yom Kippur? What does that mean they don't accept? Okay, maybe the state of Israel doesn't accept it, but what is that language? So we're having all these issues going on with conversion. And if you get through all the politics, what it comes down to is what is required for a conversion when it comes to acceptance of mitzvot. It's clear in the Gemara and the Rambam that you need to accept the mitzvot, boas mitzvot. You need mila for a man, tevila for a man and woman, and acceptance of mitzvot. What does that mean, accept mitzvot? Does that mean you'll never sin? Does that mean you accept the mitzvot knowing that you're going to be like everyone else and you're going to sin? What about if you say, well, yeah, I accept the mitzvot, but if you're asking me honestly, I am going to tell Lashon Hara. That we're going to say it's not a valid conversion. Religious Jews tell Lashon Hara. Ramosha Feinstein said it can't mean what people think it means, everything, because Ramosha says if someone converts and he's honest and tells the beis din, I don't think I could give up my life. If someone puts a gun to my head and says, bow down to the cross, which you're leaving, or I'll kill you. Of course, we know that's Harag Over. And the person says, I don't think honestly I could give up my life, and I probably would violate it, like most Jews would. Does that make you not Jewish? Or Moshe says, of course not. It doesn't make you not Jewish. So what does it mean? And what about if you only find out about that later? So this is a huge issue. I'm not going to go into it so much. We'll see what the Tshuva says, but that's what the issue is all about. And I can tell you that there are views on both sides. Since we're coming out of Toronto here, Rabbi Price, who was in Montreal, he was in Toronto, right? Rabbi Price had a very liberal view on this. He wrote these Sfarim, these giant Sfarim, this heaviest Sfarim I've ever seen. And in his commentary on Sefer Hasidim, he says that we know that most of the people we convert are not going to be observant, but it doesn't matter. As long as they say publicly they're accepting the Torah, Devarim should believe in Devarim, what they think privately doesn't matter, and they'll be punished like any sinning Jew. And that was the opinion of many. Others hold, this isn't something new invented by the Haredim, others hold that no, if you have reason to believe that the person who's converting is trying to pull a fast one over on the beis din, doesn't really intend to observe the mitzvot, we don't say as long as they verbally say it, they have to really mean it. It doesn't mean they won't sin or anything, but they have to mean that they accept the mitzvot, then it's not binding. And even after the fact, if we see, not 20 years later like we see now, but we see them in 2 weeks, B'Machal Shabbos, we can say that they never accepted it. Rabbi Price said, well, his attitude is they need to accept the idea of Shabbos. Doesn't mean that they're going to do it. So this is a major machlokas. And then the question is, what about the Diavad? A lot of people hold you need to get this at the beginning, but the Diavad, if they don't, and I'll show you a proof from the Rambam they bring, it's still a valid conversion. So that's what the basic dispute is all about. So what was this tshuva? The next tshuva is a letter from this rabbi. Many of you have heard of him, not that one, Rav Chaim Amsel. Let me tell you about Rav Chaim Amsel, who's one of the most interesting figures in the last 10 years in Israel. He's from Algeria, a Moroccan family that made its way to Algeria, Oran. As a youth, he came to Israel, and he ended up learning in Rav Mazuz's yeshiva, Kisei Racham, in Bnei Brak. He actually, I tell you, he's a very big Talmid Chacham. Unlike, he was in the Shas party, I'll talk about it in a second, but he's been a practicing Rav. He's an author of books out here. He has numerous Sfarim, including 2 very big volumes of Responsa, Minchat Chaim. He served as the Rav of the Sephardic community in Geneva for a number of years. When he went to Kisei Racham in Bnei Brak, it was a very small yeshiva. Now it's
Okay, Dooovid, was there anything you heard there on conversion you wanted to comment on?
Yeah, man, I'll put myself out there, and I'll say it now because I was thinking that related to the George Floyd stuff, that how it kind of fizzled out, that it's possible Trump might win in a massive landslide, even like 60-70%, if the Democratic Party can't get together. But I thought Ivanka Trump's conversion to Judaism was miraculous because God was going to miraculously cause the temple to be rebuilt in our lifetime. And, to me, that's a pretty, that's part of my identity as an Orthodox Jew, that I interpret events like that. But I still try to be rational. Like when Shapiro talks about conversion scholarly, To me, it's just an unfathomable observance that I've made, that basically all Jews have their own version of conversion. And, from even secular, unaffiliated to Reform to Reconstructionist, and have this kind of like, you're really a Jew and you're not. So it's even Reconstructionist Jews just, don't reach the point like that. It doesn't matter. If you want to call yourself a Jew, do it. They still have a conversion process. So maybe only because I'm an outsider and I know tons of converts because I'm, around in the Jewish area, and, I'm friendly, I speak to people, and, usually, I speak to the people that other people aren't as friendly to, and a lot of times those are converts. And, I usually say, like, look at your conversion as between you and God, that you're standing before God as a Jew, but at the same time, you're joining the community, and accept the factual elements of, you can't be accepted by all Jews. It's just impossible. There's going to be different legal systems, but for whatever reason, the phenomenon of sociology is basically no Jews look at it that way. And like superstition of Kaddish, many times, just like, one of the earlier things, like as a driver, like, I got my start making up a minyan for people, like just sitting around in shul learning. And, when they needed someone for a minyan, they would call me. And, it's a good way to get a start and meet people in the community. But like even, secular Jews get superstitious about a minyan. So if there's like, you could have like a completely secular Jew, like even someone like Yair Lapid, or in an American example that, never cared about much Jewish law in their life, but, God forbid their parents die, and they want to say Kaddish. And they really care that all 10 people in that minyan are Jewish. And then they're going to have some sort of difficulty, saying like who's a Jew or who's not. And, so it's interesting, saying like, it makes it difficult to understand Shapiro, because I don't really cast Shapiro as like yeshiva talk. So like, it's like, if you're talking for yeshiva, where maybe he is, so he's talking to a certain level of people who are substantially very familiar with Jewish concepts. So he doesn't explain things in a way that if a goy was listening, he didn't know much about it. But then I'm making my own dynamics. And to me, it's just a baffling amazement that Dooovid will accept there's something spiritually different between a Jew and a non-Jew. And I'm not going to figure it out. Like, I don't know. And, it's like I said, the blessing that those rabbis made on Trump, saying like, Luke, are you an Orthodox Jew? Like, that guy chanted some Hebrew mantra over the president. What does that mean, to you? It's got to mean something. And, so like, just like Kaddish and these things, when you say Judaism as a religion, you're saying there's a certain, like, what does it mean? And, so it's fascinating, these dynamics. And like in Jewish studies, I think that's why the alt-right really tear these guys apart. God forbid, like Shapiro, all of these guys they might even get torn apart by someone like Norvin, because they're so used to like being able to talk with these open gaps in their presentation or their style, like, like it was kind of phrased to use yeshiva argument, that like even a guy like Norvin might just like pop in there and, God forbid, like deliver a KO on someone like Shapiro. I mean, could you see that? Like Norvin at least temporarily delivering a KO on Shapiro?
Not in a million years, but I'm going to move on for today. So we'll continue this tomorrow, Dooovid. So thanks for coming on the show.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, take care. Okay, I want to play. This is Bryan Callen, the comic, responding to rape allegations.
Hey everybody, Bryan Callen here. When you're in a situation like I am, you get a lot of advice from a lot of different people. And it usually falls into two different categories. Either they tell you to post a statement and disappear, or they say lay low and let the news cycle pass you by. Well, for better or for worse, I'm not doing any of that. I never thought in a million years that I'd be sitting here defending myself against something I did not do 21 years ago. So this is me saying that I categorically and absolutely deny all the allegations against me. I wanted you to see me say that. I didn't want to post some stale statement. I wanted you to hear that come out of my mouth. I have been characterized as someone that no one who knows me, not my friends, not my family, not my fans, would ever recognize. And that's because that's not who I am. That is not that's not something I could do. Those are things never did things that I couldn't do. Those are not things that I would ever do.
Okay, so the idea that any man with the opportunity would not try to push a woman into sex, I'm not siding with the allegations against him, but any man who says, "Oh, I could never try to manipulate or push a woman into sex," a normal heterosexual man, I'm skeptical of that
That is
claim.
not how I have ever lived my life.
But and this notion that, oh, this is never how I've never lived my life. Guess what? You saw some video clips of me, someone with a hidden camera. There'd be some pretty ugly, crude behavior that I've engaged in with women, trying to manipulate them into bed, and I don't think I'm alone here. So count me skeptical of his response.
By the way, this is not a video about cancel culture. This is not a video, it's certainly not a video about the Me Too movement. I happen to believe, and it's taken me, to be completely honest, it's taken me a while to come to this conclusion, to understand this. I believe that the Me Too movement is one of the most important movements of my lifetime, because for the first time in history, it gives women recourse against the abuse of power. And that makes the world a better place. And that is not a political statement. That's just fair play. And I believe in fair play. But I also believe in due process. And we live in a very strange time where anybody can make an allegation against you and you are guilty until proven innocent. It's just a fact that social media and the press alone can act as judge, jury, and executioner. And I don't think that's good for anybody. And by the way, I don't know how to fix that. I don't think anybody in particular is even to blame. But when something like this happens, this is pretty much the only way you can defend yourself. So this is me standing up and saying that I have been falsely accused of terrible things that I did not do. And that's what I have to say. Thank you for listening. And I want to thank...
Okay, so any guy who's promiscuous, the odds are pretty high that he's done some terrible things, not necessarily against the law, but women weren't really built to be screwed and then left. Okay, the basic female instinct is that any sex that does not lead to marriage was a mistake. So no woman is enhanced by you inserting your penis into her. No woman is made better by you blowing loads inside of her or on top of her or all over her. All right? So if your sex with a woman does not lead to marriage, she's going to feel bad about that interaction. Not always, but I would say for 70% of women.
Say why? I mean, Jews do believe in genetic inheritability of intelligence. We do. We'll never let that on. We'll never let you guys know that we believe that. But oh boy, do we certainly believe that. We will publicly say things like, oh, the Schwarzers, they're the same as us. You, Schwarzer, you, oi. There's no difference. Privately, we'll be like, oh, if my daughter was to marry a Schwarzer, oi, the Shanda, the child, will be dumb in the head, oi. We do believe in, generally speaking, in intelligence inheritability, but you would never know that by speaking to us publicly or reading our writings. Now, somebody in response to the comment section, somebody in response to that question, suggested that the reason Jews are so intelligent and articulate is they don't let their kids watch TV like non-Jewish kids do. Well, I'm sorry, that's just really false. We are the people who create TV, and we're immersed. We are immersed in the entertainment industry from our earliest years. I was a voracious consumer of media, TV, movies, radio, everything, and did not make me any less intellectual. In fact, every now and then I'll use a reference, some cultural reference in my column that nobody gets, and I like doing that. But that's because I just...
So plenty of Orthodox Jews don't own a TV and don't watch TV. So to be a normal Orthodox Jew is to not own a TV. Plenty of Orthodox Jewish kids have grown up to thank their parents for not allowing them to watch TV. Okay, here is JF Gariépy talking about Tomi Lahren.
And there she is on Facebook. She will be telling us how to act to get a woman like her. Because you have to understand that you're not enough, okay? And she will literally say this, not a single man is enough for a woman like her. So she will never run after a man. Now, let me pull a picture here. What's her name? Ann Coulter. I want Tomi Lahren to be looking at this woman. Please understand this, Tomi. This is your future. My name is JF. I have traveled through a DeLorean from the year 2050. And this is your future. You're going to be a childless right-winger, a 60-year-old childless right-winger. Do you realize what's going on here? We are into this precious moment of life where a female realizes the biological clock is ticking, and there's an army of available uteruses with a potential of 10, 12 babies per uterus that's coming in. They're at the door. Knock, knock. We're here.
It's very unfortunate. I don't think it's going to be fulfilling. But I would say to the men out there, kind of maybe...
It's not going to be fulfilling. You're going to go out with a beautiful 21-year-old, make 10 babies, and you're going to end your life by saying, that wasn't quite fulfilling. I would have preferred a Nashville intellectual, conservative, right-wing, pro-abortion thinker. I don't feel quite satisfied about life with my 10 children.
Find a woman that you can talk to, communicate with, might actually have her shit together, might actually be ambitious and have something going.
Ambitious in the domain of the career is not a great factor. Unless you're looking for a guy who likes money drainage and who will perceive you as a provider. I mean, I'm not saying that these guys are wrong, but I'm saying the value of your career and ambition just tells me that, okay, you have those genes that finding themselves in a female have not shut themselves off to leave place to the other genes that would have driven her to have babies. And so do I really want those genes in my descendants? Do I really want my female descendants to be this sociopathic, this career-oriented, and to not understand that the beauty of life is reproduction? I don't think so.
Going on or want to have something going on. I don't care what she does. She doesn't have to be on TV. She doesn't have to be a PhD. She doesn't have to be a television producer. She doesn't have to own her own company, but be ambitious and have something going on.
Well, okay, you want special women around you because you have bought into the Marxist conception of female success, which, by the way, has been designed to destroy the family, just to be clear. The reason young females of today are rising with this ideology that the only way they can realize themselves is by not having children and by instead having a career has been designed by Marxists so that females could have an elbow of freedom outside of their dependence toward men. So please understand this, Tommy. Your CV as a right-winger is starting to trigger some questions in me. You're a conservative right-winger who lives the Beverly Hills social circle lifestyle, who has no respect for women who want to be stay-at-home mothers, who doesn't have children herself, who stands in fact for abortion and defends publicly the right of abortion. And on top of it, you buy any Marxist meme that's thrown at you, which in the end destroys the family in America. What's left? What makes this woman a right-winger again? The fact that she did some documentaries filming farmers?
Those women out there are going to be a lot more fulfilling to you. You're actually going to enjoy your time. And if you actually might want a sustainable and healthy and...
I'm not enjoying my time right now with you, Tommy.
And by the way, if I'm no longer interested because your effort is shitty, that's not me being a bitch. That's not me being difficult. That's me having a standard in which I expect from people. I do have high standards and high expectations. My friends have high standards and high expectations. Do you want to know why? We've worked for those. Okay? We work hard. We're successful.
Here's someone who has such high standards that she will never reproduce. This is your life model, Tommy.
We take care of ourselves. We try to look cute. We have a desire to be something more.
We try to look cute. This is our claim to fame. It's like, please understand something, you little persons, you weaklings of the universe. I'm trying to look cute on an everyday basis. And so, please stop bothering me with text. Do you realize the effort to maintain this Barbie look? Don't message me after I've removed my makeup. I'm trying to look cute. Please understand. I can't look cute and watch Netflix at the same time. I'm trying to look cute. Do you understand how much I'm trying? No, we understand, Tommy. We see it. You're trying to look cute.
Each day, okay? That's why we have the ability to be somewhat what you call difficult. It's not difficult. We just have a baseline standard.
No, you are difficult. We can see it through everything that you've said in this video. You are imposing standards on imaginary people. We're not even in your life yet, and you're already micromanaging our behavior.
And if you can't meet that standard, that's okay. A lot of men cannot. But if you are one of those men out there, and I have them all over my DMs, sometimes I...
If you are one of those men out there, please come and save me. Please come and make me a baby. Like, this is the rational part of our brain screaming, help! I'm stuck in this Barbie.
Okay, we got a video here talking about child abuse in Hollywood.
In that video. This is a bigger problem because most people know in that world, and the world that I come from in Hollywood, that it is a hidden layer that everybody knows is there. When the Me Too movement started in 2017, I reached out to several of my female actress friends who were prominent in LA. You would know them by name. Many of them you would know by just their look, because you go, oh, that was her in that movie or that movie. And I said, well, what about the children? What about the children? And the response was, we know. But they were silent on it. And it destroyed me because it destroyed my illusion of what rights, human rights were, children's rights were. This is a child abuse system that we have been living in for a very long time, and it's been allowed to go on. And I will not be silent about this because it affects every single one of us. The people on television who smile at you, who tell you stories, who give you news, are the ones who hide all of this from us. They are not talking about the real issues. They are distracting you with division issues. This is a unification issue. When the Maxwell files came out 48 hours ago, I went on MSNBC, I went on CNN.com, and I looked at every single one of their headlines, and there was no mention of it whatsoever. They were talking about John Lewis's funeral. They were talking about Obama versus Trump, all of the bullshit that you and I hear every single day. And it doesn't matter what side of the political equation you're on this. This is a child issue. This is a human issue. This is not a political issue. It has nothing to do with left versus right, Democrat versus Republican, liberal versus conservative, or anything you are or you identify with as in between. We are faced with a crisis of consciousness among the leadership of our banking institutions, of our media corporations, of the Hollywood entertainment industry, of the music industry. This is not about a bunch of young women who were having...
Okay, let's get something here from Paul Gottfried.
Very glad that you are here tonight. I think it goes without saying that the audience has been eagerly awaiting the platform and how that relates to the...
No, I don't
say about what Walk of the West brought up.
No, I don't know the translators of all of these great figures, but I know the translators of Schmidt, who have been close friends of mine, and all of them did absolutely splendid jobs translating Schmidt's work. In the case of Aristotle, most of the translations that have come down to us, from Jawed on, are fine. The ones, the ones that I've looked at. I have read Aristotle mostly in Greek, but when I have looked at translations, some of them are very good, and they also are able to puzzle out meaning of what looks to me like very elliptic syntax that I don't quite grasp. And they, in some cases, they do very good guesswork. They figure out what Aristotle meant, what the elliptical phrases mean. So most of the translations that have come down to us of Aristotle are fine. The other ones I'm not quite sure of. There some people like Kant have been so well translated. The Norman Kemp Smith's translation of the Critique of Pure Reason is much clearer than the original German. Having looked at both, I assure you it is. Sometimes translators do an extremely good job. One of the things that the translations I encountered when I was a young student in college was Constance Garnett's translation of Dostoevsky. I do not read much Russian, but the translation is magnificent. So that sometimes translators do very good jobs.
And from Douglas Edward, 84, wanted to congratulate Paul on what an incredible anthology The Vanishing Tradition was. Fantastic ensemble of writers and varied topics. I hope anyone who wrote for the book hasn't appeared on the show yet. I hope anyone who wrote for the book who hasn't appeared on the show yet will at some point. I'd especially love to see George Hawley and Richard Marcy on Cotto-Gottfried.
No, that would be good. I think we might contact them. I'm sure Richard Marcy would be delighted to appear on this. He seems to be very isolated in Victoria, British Columbia. I don't know about George Hawley. I think Hawley probably would be interested as well. But whoever it is who likes the anthology, you have two of the anthology writers, sitting here right now, and so we are delighted that you responded so favorably to our work.
Yes, it's nice to see that people have response. I think, Paul, this book has got a great response so far. I've not read a single negative review of it, so this is really a plus for us, needless to say.
And the dog came to us in sort of needy condition. She had problems with her eyes, and we thought she was blind. Told me the dog is definitely a Tibetan Spaniel.
Also, like some kinds of jazz, I like. That's my take there. Paul, anything to say about Walk of the West brought up?
I was going to say, growing up with my parents, popular music was Viennese light opera for around 19. That was that we listened to, or. This is about as close as we came to light opera. Then later on, after it ceased to be popular, I started to like Roger and Hammerstein music. I thought it was excellent. And Carousel is one of my. It's not a popular. It's almost like Viennese light opera by now, right? But it's absolutely marvelous musical. I've listened to it many times. Sound of Music is very nice. So that to me is popular music. I'm afraid that since then there's very little in the way of popular music that I like. You know, if one were asking me to choose, I don't know. Some of the early rock music is nice, like Elvis Presley. It has a kind of sentimental story attached. I was young at the time, so I will listen to that. Obviously, I loathe rap music. You know, the forms of art that are glorified by Black Lives Matter do not appeal to me.
No, they don't appeal to me either. I was going to say that I do like disco as well, most of it at least. A lot of disco music is very, very good. Actually has very complex musical arrangements, a lot of different instruments, and it took a great deal of intelligence to do that. So I know disco is not often spoken of in the same sense as symphonic music, but a lot of disco is very decent. So that's just my perspective. Interestingly enough, I think I got my like of disco from my mother, who danced at Studio 54 back when that was a thing in New York City, a very long time ago now. Anyway, from Marc Jabek, will Paul attend future AmRen conferences? How can it be done to, I suppose, convince Jews that they're basically white and should move to the right, and organizations such as the ADL are not nice? We'll put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Is AmRen American Renaissance going to have more conferences? And will they have conferences in venues, you know, or in locations that, you know, do not cause enormous discomfort and inconvenience to the people going there? And I think that would depend on whether they're able to get accommodations and other facilities, decent hotels in major cities or areas that are, you know, easily accessible to the people. You know, if going to AmRen means, you know, going to some kind of woodland or forest in Tennessee and traveling down there and then getting heckled, you know, once I'm there, the answer is no. You know, I consider this, you know, a very uncongenial kind of experience to expose myself to. So, you know, I think much depends on what they can do. But also the question of, you know, what is the future of right-wing organizations or right-wing meetings and conferences? It does not look very good at this time. It may become better in the future. You know, if the left goes too far and lands up, you know, God willing, destroying itself. You know, it might be an opportunity to do things in the right. But I think the right, as I've indicated many times, faces two problems. One is the left, and the other is the conservative movement, which will do anything to cancel the right, to make sure nobody ever hears of the right unless they attack them as racist or something like that. So, you know, the right faces tremendous barriers in trying to gain recognition and certainly social acceptability.
And anything to say about how to convince Jews that they're basically white, as Mark said, and should move to the right, and that organizations such as the ADL are not nice? I will just say, Mark, very quickly before Paul shares his views on that, the ADL is not popular throughout the Jewish sphere. Even a lot of folks on the left who are Jewish in America don't like the ADL because they perceive it as a self-serving organization that really just tries to get as much money for its own interests. Obviously, Jews on the right in America are not sympathetic toward the ADL. And I suppose as for convincing Jews they're basically white, should move to the right, that's already happening in France, a huge time in France. It's happening in the UK now, and even in Canada. And a lot of that's because the Muslim immigration to these countries has been much greater per capita than in the United States, and Muslim anti-Semitism can hardly be put into words. So that's what's happening in those places. In the United States, I think that as the Orthodox population grows, it will continue, the GOP will get more and more Jewish support. Also, there are, well, most secular Jews definitely vote on the left, no question about it. I have noticed that here in Florida, electoral precincts, where the polling station is that you vote, I've looked at the data precinct by precinct, and there is something of a shift to the right where a lot of secular Jews live. In Florida, I can't see, but everywhere else, I think it's just because the Democrats have become more anti-Israel, even though Israel's not a huge issue for most Jewish voters in America. And also the Democrats have adopted more of the Bernie Sanders agenda, so to speak, and that's not popular with a lot of Jewish voters who are more well-to-do than the general population. So there's different stuff going on here, Mark. I don't think there'll be any one thing to convince Jews about what you said, but I think a confluence of factors certainly. And I will just say that in the latest Democracy Institute survey, which I interviewed the fellow behind it, Patrick Basham, about, it's a 2-hour interview, which folks should definitely watch. He finds that Trump's support among Jews, his popularity among Jews, to be precise, is at 35%, which is very decent indeed compared to what Republicans have gotten in the past. It's a very reliable poll. So I think there's a chance this year that Trump might do about as well as Ronald Reagan did in 1980 with the Jewish vote, given all the craziness going on in the cities and the rise of left-wing anti-Semitism. Paul, anything to say about what Mark brought up?
Yeah, I think it's going to be very hard to get most Jews to move to the right. Jewish organizations, Zionist organizations, and so forth, very often mix their pro-Israel statements with attacks on Gentiles who are living in Gentile countries. They will emphasize Christian anti-Semitism, even where it doesn't even exist. It hasn't existed.
And question in the chat is why are the votes of 1.5% of the population even important? And it's because of where they are, and also because the enormous amount of money, energy, organization, enthusiasm, and influence that they can bring to bear. So there are a lot of Jews in certain political races that are kind of on the edge, and also Jews vote at very high rates compared to the average population. So Jews punch well above their place in the general population. The Jews only comprise about 1.5% of the American population, but because where they are situated, their high rates of voting, the money, enthusiasm, and influence that they can bring to bear make them disproportionately influential, just as for different reasons blacks are disproportionately influential in the Democratic Party. So the Democratic Party has become the black party, not because blacks are the majority of its voters, but because they are the most energetic, the most willing to go out and riot or to protest because of their rhetorical abilities, their performance abilities, and perhaps in some ways their organizational abilities, that they're not encumbered by the concerns of ordinary voters, so they have more time to devote to social protest.
For a very long time, because this is simply seen as a tactic to get Jews to express solidarity by giving money to Jewish organizations, by giving money to Israel. And I think it was Peter, I think it was his last name, not Navik, who wrote a book on American culture and the Holocaust, in which he showed, how Jews in the 1940s and 50s had gone from associating the Holocaust with anti-Christian pagans, not even with all Germans, to viewing the Holocaust as something that was done not only by the evil German people, but by all white Christians. And with all white Christians, they sat back, they either passively or actively supported the destruction of European Jewry. This is utter nonsense. But it has been pushed by Jewish organizations in order to create Jewish solidarity in the face of assimilation. And it has worked. I would say that Jews today are far more radical than when I was growing up. And this is also true even for the Eastern European Jews, who are always to the left of the German and Central European Jews, and the Sephardic Jews. But all of the Jews that I've known of a younger generation, so this is not so true. This is not true really of my generation. It's true of the younger generation. And they were exposed to this combination, this anti-Christian leftist ideas coupled with Jewish nationalism, whether they went to synagogues or whatever. I think the Orthodox will vote generally for the Republicans. The question is, are all Jews going to become Orthodox? I don't think either Joseph or I would want to see that happen, right? Is it some alternative?
Right, not all Jews are going to become Orthodox, but Orthodox Judaism is the only form of Jewish organization that has shown itself in the diaspora to perpetuate Judaism. So all other forms of Jewish expression, by and large, people assimilate and essentially are flushed down the toilet of Jewish history. So also Orthodox Jews are far more committed than non-Orthodox Jews. So there's Orthodox Jews have the learning in Torah text. They observe the tradition, the commandments. They have growing numbers because Orthodox Jews reproduce. They have a lot of children, while secular Jews have far fewer children. So even though Orthodox Jews are only about 15% of American Jewry, they punch way above their weight. So just as there is this general conception that in the future more and more of us are going to have to learn to speak Chinese because the Chinese supposedly will become so economically powerful, in Jewish life, increasingly Jewish life is dominated by the Orthodox because they are more cohesive, they're more organized, they're more effective, they punch much harder even with their lower numbers. So increasingly Jewish organizations, secular Jewish organizations, are having an influx of Orthodox Jews. Orthodox Jews now frequently working for the previously completely secular Jewish federations. More and more Jewish organizations are being staffed and operated and run by Orthodox Jews, and Orthodox Jewish sensibilities are increasingly catered to by even secular Jewish organizations, because while Orthodox Jews are only about 15% of the overall American Jewish population, for Jews under the age of 18, there's something like 40%.
It's like saying, the only Christians who are going to, support something are members of the Oriental Orthodox Church living in a monastery. Obviously, you want other Jews not to.
And I just thought of another example of this. Almost all Jewish blogging has been from Orthodox Jews. So the dominant Jewish imprint online with regard to Judaism has come from Orthodox Jews, because Orthodox Jews have far more enthusiasm. They're far more passionate about their Judaism, their Yiddishkeit, their Torah than non-Orthodox Jews. And Dooovid was talking earlier about who's going to influence. Well, in part, who's going to influence is those who have the enthusiasm and the will. So I've always had a fairly small imprint online. But for years there, I did have the #1 Jewish website for, say, breaking news, scandals. It was like a Jewish version of the Drudge Report. I don't know, something like 2003 to 2007. So most of the most thoughtful, intelligent, devoted, influential Jewish blogging and Jewish production online with regard to Judaism has been done by Orthodox Jews. So they're only 15%, say, of the American Jewish population. But as far as their influence online with regard to discussion of Judaism, Orthodox Jews will probably comprise something like at least 75%.
To be politically crazy, but many of them are. My sister-in-law was telling me that she was in Westport, Connecticut, and all the Jews who live there now have Black Lives Matter signs on their windows. These obviously are not going to vote for Trump. And, they don't even like black people. They just don't like white Christians. I mean, that's what it comes. They fear them. They think that, they're their enemies and so forth. Therefore, they ally themselves with the other being the Muslims, the others being the Black Lives Matter, although they probably don't like either group. The question is, will Jews overcome this insanity, which seems to afflict them? But at the same time, I should point out, as the insanity is inflicting all kinds of other groups in this country, they're not alone. But not alone, but they're more. I think it's what John Schmidt said. The Jews are like other Americans, but just more so. So I think others are crazy. The Jews are even crazier. I'd be very happy if 35% voted for Trump. It was close to 3% last time. But the question is, you take away the Orthodox, how many are left?
I think it depends on the state. I think it really depends on the state.
Yeah.
And one thing before we move on, it's interesting because today, if it wants to talk about left-wing idealism, the biggest I think group where there will be more secular Jewish whose initials are EMJ, which we don't need to get into, but voted on in August, according to activists of diverse lower court nominees. The Sotomayor, the entire liberal faction of the Supreme Court, there is no question that they vote with much more. Because also take a look at how often Democratic federal judges appointed by Obama, not so much by Clinton, mostly by Obama, will try to stop some kind of executive action by anything by Republicans. They're always jumping into it. I don't see Republicans very often jumping into this and stopping Democratic administrations. So even if Democratic voters this time round are not as motivated as Republican voters, their judges and their politicians are much more ideologically driven and will act much more consistently on the base. I mean, there are no Democratic Mitt Romneys, as far as I can see, sitting in the United States Senate, are there? Right? There's no, what's her name, Murkowski or Collins or any of these other people. They vote as a block every single time, right? They follow party discipline. The people sitting in the House of Representatives, they vote like robots, the way Pelosi and her people tell them to. There's never anyone who breaks. There's nobody. And it's interesting, even someone like Manchin, Joe Manchin from West Virginia, who's supposed to be a moderate, like Republican or this, 99% of the time it seems he will vote with Democrats, right? And say exactly what they do. So it is they who are ideologically driven. Would that the Republicans were as ideologically driven? Unfortunately, they're not. No, they aren't. That goes without saying. And I mean, the ramifications of this are pretty close to limitless. But you're correct in your analysis of voting behavior on the Supreme Court. Reading from what's Elise Hogue, who is the president of NARAL Pro-Choice America. This is what she said about what the new platform plank. The radical right has been working for decades to stack our courts with extremist judges. Even if voters deliver the change our country needs in November, we will still be facing a fundamentally altered judiciary, badly in need of intervention and reform. It's time for a bold conversation about what that reform looks like. We can't simply sit back and accept that.
To use the court to advance their individual and group agendas, and of course, not all of them are concerned about the same, but they travel in the same company. It's like you can tell me that most blacks oppose abortion, oppose gay marriage. I'll agree with you, but when it comes to voting, they vote the same way. Because they know they're going to get something, or their leaders or something will get something, some kind of recognition. They'll get reparations. They'll get affirmative action programs. Even if the other side gets, abortion on demand anywhere on the street or in any house in the country, you can have an abortion. But whatever at any point, even after the baby comes. So blacks may not support this, but they do support, getting their own. They want something from this alliance system. And if the judiciary can be changed in such a way that the intersectional leftist agenda get everything they want. Right. But, the blacks will say we get something. The gays will get something. By the way, I like the radical right. There's no radical left. Where's the radical right? Radical right starts with what, Mitch McConnell, Mitt Romney, or what? They're all radical right. Every time I read it, I'm on the radical right. I don't know. Mitch McConnell's on the radical right. But in fact, there's no left. They're just centrist or compassionate people or nice people, who want to save the Constitution by the courts. So I really like the vocabulary. I did this book, on anti-fascism, and anything the left doesn't like is fascist. You can't say, no, we have to disagree. No, the fascist. And anything the conservative movement doesn't like is fascist, right? The Democrats are the real fascists, not the Republicans. But, there's certain terms just get thrown around. and it's like radical, radical right. Everything is radical right, or white identitarian right, which I suspect by now, includes our centrist, wishy-washy senator in Pennsylvania, probably also a racist, fascist, radical right. So I mean, but for those who are looking at it, what radical right means is Republican, right? I mean, that's, or the who might not vote with LGBT, they're the radical right.
It's the radical right at this point. I mean, obviously there is a radical right out there, but it's so minuscule that it really doesn't warrant. That's all I'll read. Capacity. And I think the ultimate goal, the holy.
To me, it is remarkable that people who are not starving, as the Germans were when they voted for the Nazis, would actually support these idiots. Everything they do, I think you're right. It's transparent. It's a transparent power grab. What is actually, laughable is their talk about grassroots. They do not believe in democratic grassroots. They want to entirely circumvent the people. They believe in the people as much as Lenin did. They want a dictatorship, and the people for them are large corporations, the LGBT lobby, feminists, and what they still have left of a black mob, and even that they may be losing. This is what the left is now coming down to, grabbing the courts is only one part of a much larger overall strategy to take control. They also have these phony ballots they want to use for the election. They just send them to people's houses. You don't even apply for them; they just send them. Then it takes like a year to count them afterwards, and they have massive fraud. I think in New York City they try to do this and so forth. What this will do is really end the democratic electoral process. And if they really are lucky and can win, then we'll become a one-party dictatorship as long as they want to maintain the one party. And there'll be actually no coming back from that, as any kind of constitutional republic. So I think we're in a very dangerous situation with these people. They do not represent people; they represent elites, power-hungry elites that are using racial minorities and others to take power.
It's a sad and sickening situation.
So I don't agree that there's no way back. Look at Brazil; they elected Bolsonaro. So I don't agree with this kind of blackpilling. I just wanted to throw that out there.
One-party dictatorship. And the whole thing is a lie. Of that, the radical right has run. I mean, I can't even. When did the radical right run this? You had at best some Republicans who didn't use their power as effectively as the Democrats have done. This seems to be a major problem, that you have one party that is full of ideological zeal, and has the wind in its back, and the other side, as I say, is a collection of used car salesmen and funeral directors. I expect very little.
Yeah, the whole situation is interesting and scary at the same time.
Really go to town, if Biden wins, if he wins theoretically, since obviously he will never govern anything, even his own basement. But, our next president, de facto president, will be Kamala Harris or somebody like that. And she'll really go to town, imposing a left-wing dictatorship and using the courts to do so.
Paul, my perspective is that Kamala Harris has been the Democratic choice for the vice presidency for some time. She comes from San Francisco, which is where Nancy Pelosi comes to go, at least, and it hasn't come yet.
Take away your guns, even though the blacks are buying guns at double the rate of white people. Take away your guns, and they'll also defund the police. It'll really be I'm not sure that even the supposedly consoling presence of Kamala Harris or what's it, Karen, who's the black Muslim who visits Cuba. Any of these people will keep these black votes from hemorrhaging. I think Trump will pick up far more black votes than he did last time.
I agree entirely. I think he'll pick up more black votes. I think he'll pick up more Jewish votes, work in Trump's favor. But I think
when you're talking about his support among Republicans or support among whites are at 58%. Because his support among Republicans seems to be like 80.
Oh, it's astronomical. I think it's 84 in the latest Democracy Institute poll, or 85.
Right. And what is Biden's support among Democrats? It's probably comparable, I guess.
I think it's 70 something.
That's not very good.
No, it's not. It's terrible. Actually, we were discussing that passion. According to the Democracy Institute, the GOP is picking up a quarter of the Democratic votes, and that comes disproportionately, almost entirely, he said, from blacks and Hispanics. And these people are very angry about what's going on, the violence, the unrest. And it's not difficult to understand, because if you don't have a lot of money, you don't have a lot of prospects of improving your life and moving to a better neighborhood, you're stuck where you are. But at the same time, if you see all these Democratic politicians saying that, we don't want you to own guns, we want to cut the police funding so there's more people to run ragged through your neighborhood. Maybe if you're a shopkeeper, it means that you'll be in personally more danger. Even if you're not a shopkeeper, it means that you might get mugged walking down to the corner market, or maybe the market just closes down because the person can no longer.
Okay, let's cut to Tucker Carlson.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight we want to open with a Fox News alert. It was a dramatic scene in Washington this afternoon. A man shot outside the White House. The president pulled off stage by the Secret Service during a live press conference. Here's video from the moment it happened.
It looks like they're just about going to be topping records, hopefully soon. Excuse me?
What's going on, Mr. President? What's happening?
Fox News' chief White House correspondent John Roberts was there when it happened inside the briefing room. He joins us tonight from the White House for an update on what this story is about. John.
Tucker, good evening to you. We just got some new information from the U.S. Secret Service. It says the investigation into a U.S. Secret Service officer involved shooting is ongoing. A male subject and a Secret Service officer were both transported to a local hospital. At no time during this incident was the White House complex breached or were any of the protectees in danger. It was about 10 minutes to 6. I was out on the north lawn and heard in rapid succession, bam, boom, like that, what sounded like 2 gunshots. It was going on the incident at the corner of southeast corner of 17th and Pennsylvania Avenue, just on the other side of the Eisenhower Executive Office building. Within a couple of minutes, the Secret Service agent who was stationed here with the president in the Brady briefing room walked up to the president and said, "Sir, we have to leave. There's been shots fired outside the White House." The president was taken to the area near the Oval Office where he waited for a few minutes but wanted Tucker to come back into the briefing room. You'll remember that when those protests were going on across Lafayette Square, across the street from the White House, the president was whisked down to the bunker for a short period of time. The president didn't want a repeat of that, so he got back here to the Brady briefing room just as soon as it was possible. Again, according to the Secret Service, at no time did an individual breach the grounds of the White House. At no time were the protectees in danger, and there are many of them here at the White House, Tucker, but a Secret Service officer, uniformed officer, and a suspect both taken to the hospital. No word yet on their condition, though I did have one source tell me the injuries do not appear to be life-threatening. Tucker?
John Roberts, thanks so much for that. Craziness, but it seems now almost normal. Violence is a feature of daily life at this point in the nation's capital. Over the weekend, 21 people were shot in a single incident in Washington. More than half of them were women. One was a D.C. police officer. It was the single biggest mass shooting in America this year, and yet you probably heard nothing about it. Members of Congress didn't lock arms on the House floor to demand an end to the gun violence. CNN didn't book a procession of weepy teenage gun control activists for an extended town hall meeting. News organizations barely touched the story, and when they did, they moved on fast. It wouldn't help the Biden campaign to talk about it, so they didn't talk about it. As far as we can tell, neither CNN nor MSNBC even mentioned it today. 21 people shot in a group in our capital city, and they acted like it didn't happen. But it did happen. We're showing it to you on the screen right now. 21 African Americans shot by gunmen, yet the media spent all weekend telling you about how Simon Cowell fell off his electric bike in Malibu, because really, Black Lives Matter. MSNBC wants you to know that. It's grotesque. But it's now the rule. Dead bodies don't count unless they are politically useful dead bodies. Last month, the gang members shot 15 people outside a funeral home in Chicago. It looked like Fallujah. We played some of the video of it on this show. It was very upsetting. The other channels did not play it. None of the primetime hosts on CNN or MSNBC even mentioned the shooting. They didn't care. Politicians didn't care either. Muriel Bowser is the mayor of Washington, D.C. Bowser claims to care about black lives very much. She ordered the slogan Black Lives Matter, in fact, painted in yellow on the road leading to the White House just to underscore how much she cares. So how did Muriel Bowser respond when 21 African Americans were gunned down in her city? Well, she talked about her coronavirus lockdowns. Bowser has banned gatherings in the city of more than 50 people, and apparently there were more than that at the cookout where the shooting occurred. This enraged Muriel Bowser. Here's what the mayor said about the shooting yesterday, quote, "It's important as a community that we have a zero tolerance for this kind of activity," end quote. Now, to be perfectly clear, Mayor Bowser was not talking about the mass shootings. When she said we need zero tolerance, Bowser is happy to tolerate violence. She does every day. She often encourages violence. What Bowser won't put up with is citizens violating her lockdown orders. Bowser's chief of police, a man called Peter Newsham, reiterated that point. Quote, "We can't have these large gatherings in the city," the chief said. In other words, shootings are acceptable as long as the police don't commit them. But disobey our corona decrees and we will come for you. The media wholeheartedly agree with this, of course. Violence does not bother them. They encourage it regularly. Disobedience bothers them. This weekend, motorcycle riders, mostly on Harley-Davidsons, from all over the country gathered in Sturgis, South Dakota for their annual rally, the Sturgis Rally. Some of them forgot their masks. This outraged our news media. The people on motorcycles were too masculine, too patriotic, therefore too unlikely to vote for Joe Biden to go uncriticized. So the media spent a lot of the weekend trying to shame the bikers into disappearing. In other words, as some of the poorest people in Washington bled onto the sidewalk, this is what your news anchors talked about.
A bike rally is drawing tens of thousands of people to a small town in South Dakota for what doctors warn could turn into a coronavirus super spreader event.
Not seeing a lot of masks there. Very little social distancing is what we're hearing from our team on the ground.
Tell people what the odds are, tell people what the risks and the dangers are, and let them decide and expect them to be responsible.
To others, that event a reckless affront to common sense and a likely coronavirus super spreader.
Oh, super spreaders. In other words, men who are unapologetically male. They hate that. Meanwhile, the city of Washington, back in the real world, continued to spiral toward chaos. In Georgetown, one of the richest, most liberal neighborhoods in the city, certainly in the country, a group of thugs marched down residential streets in the middle of the night to make certain that no one was sleeping. People who live there must have been confused. In Georgetown, Black Lives Matter yard signs are about as common as designer dog breeds, very common. The residents apparently thought they'd bought themselves peace by paying their indulgences with the correct political slogans, but they hadn't. The fact their neighborhood is still safe is now considered a crime, and the mob made that very clear. Did you see that footage on CNN? Oh, you didn't. You saw footage of super spreaders at Sturgis. How dare they ride motorcycles without masks? Meanwhile, back in Georgetown, again, the real world, just in case the residents there didn't feel sufficiently threatened, the mob then barricaded Key Bridge, the Francis Scott Key Bridge. That's the main artery from Georgetown out of the city. Blocking main arteries out of cities is an obvious threat to public safety. It's far more dangerous than any overattended cookout. But police didn't stop it. They helped the mob. And once again, the media collectively ignored all of it. And what exactly did the liberal, passive, heavily elderly residents of Georgetown do to deserve this kind of abuse and harassment from a mob of Joe Biden voters? That's the core question. But no one on television wanted to talk about that. So again, they just ignored the entire thing. They're doing it all over the country. Story after story ignored, disappeared down the memory hole because it's politically inconvenient. In Los Angeles, for example, a city council member called Mike Bonin voted to slash the LAPD budget by $150 million. He's very opposed to the police. But that didn't stop him from calling the police. Since April, it turns out that cops have been called to Bonin's home 8 separate times, often to deal with, surprise, surprise, protesters. Bonin's defense is that he didn't make the calls. No, somehow the LAPD, with collusion from right-wing elements, made the calls. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't make sense. But it's good enough for the newspapers in Los Angeles. They're not covering the story. It's not a story. Right. Guy who votes to defund the police calls them 8 times to keep the lunatics from coming through his front door. Not a story. Okay. Last Thursday, meanwhile, in Portland, Oregon, a city that effectively no longer has a government, rioters threw paint on an elderly woman. What was her crime? She made the mistake of trying to stop them from destroying a building. Here's why this is so interesting. As the mob attacked her, they explained their agenda. Quote, "This isn't your world anymore," they shouted. "Put your mask on." Boy, does that tell you everything. Meanwhile, in the city of Chicago, rioters have dropped any pretense of ideology. Sure, they'll vote for Joe Biden, obviously, but this isn't about the election. They just want to steal things. And in effect, authorities there, as they are in so many places, are allowing them to do that. Early this morning, caravans of looters sacked stores in downtown Chicago. Here's part of it.
Dang, folks.
country is this? And what's the justification for that? There's always a story at the bottom of these things that the media repeat, allow them to believe it was justified. The pretext for that theft and destruction you just saw was a false report that a teenager had been executed by the police. It was a lie, as it turned out. It usually is a lie. In fact, a 20-year-old had been killed after shooting at the police. Whatever. We're so used to violence justified by lies that few people seem to notice the difference. And speaking of, just this weekend, Joe Biden honored Michael Brown, that was the man killed in Ferguson, Missouri, after he violently attacked a store owner on tape and then a cop. Joe Biden apparently doesn't remember that part. He seems to consider Michael Brown a martyr. It's hard to know who in America still believes these lies. Most people no longer seem to believe anything they hear from politicians. When everything is political, we learn to trust nothing. But one thing that is real and will always be real is the debris left behind. Bullet holes are real. So are burned stores. So are boarded up windows and terrified neighbors. That will always be real. And we have it. So what will be the aftermath of all of this? What are America's cities going to look like a year from now? There's no question people will flee Georgetown. They may have BLM signs in their driveways. It doesn't mean they want screaming BLM lunatics on their streets. They don't. Nobody does, actually, no matter what they tell you. No matter what color they are. No one likes that. That's true for people in Georgetown, in Portland, Oregon, in San Francisco, in Chicago, New York, any other place where order and decency have disappeared. People will not live long with chaos. No matter what they tell you, no matter what signs they put in their yard, they will leave. And many of them have already left. We're about to see one of the great demographic shifts in American history. Unless the insanity stops, and soon, our biggest cities will revert to what they were 50 years ago. Broke, dirty, and dangerous. On the bright side, we'll have resolved the gentrification problem. So a lot of college professors will pat themselves in the back. Peter Kirsanow is a commissioner on the U.S. Civil Rights Commission, and we're happy to have him on the show regularly, including tonight. Dr. Kirsanow, thanks so much.
Okay, let's get back to Paul Gottfried here.
No longer pay the astronomical insurance fees. It's the fact of the matter is that you could easily see
black vote, right?
Yes.
And he does. It's curtains for Biden. I mean, if he's even aware of that, since he may be semi-comatose by now, but he might be unhappy. I mean, if let's say even Trump wins 25% of the black vote, the Democrats are going to go nowhere. Particularly if Trump can also win about 40%, 35 to 40% of the Hispanic vote. Those are two large black blocs, Democratic blocs, which are going the other way. And I'm not sure that the white suburban women will make up for that.
No, I don't think they will. And some, of course, white suburban women will vote for Trump. I don't want to say that all of them aren't, but female demographic has changed. Now the college education.
The same trends can be seen in Western Europe and every country. In England, Germany, France, the same demographic has moved to the left. I also don't think in 2010 it becomes a kind of dramatic shift, but I think it's been going on for a very long time, and it really has to do with what women study in college. And they don't study physics, quantum physics. They don't study mathematics. They take soft disciplines. They take become sociology majors or teaching majors. They take English and specialize in women's poetry or something like this. I think the kind of education to which women have been subject, despite all the talk about all the women who are now becoming.
Okay, there's the video. It's gone. Okay, so I've got Keith Preston here speaking.
Has opened these cleavages. What we see is that Trump is extremely popular with the Republican Party base, what they call their base. Yes, well, as I was saying earlier, the conservative movement that came out of the 1950s and was led by people like William F. Buckley, and then the neo-conservative movement that came out of the radical left, they merged probably around the 1980s, and that's really the basis of this conservative movement, this mainstream conservative movement you have today. And now that Donald Trump has emerged as a viable presidential candidate, we've seen a serious split happen between the leadership of the conservative movement and between their so-called base. And much of that gets to the issue of the long-standing hostility or conflict, at least, that there has been between the base, who tend to be social conservatives, and the elites in the so-called conservative movement, who are primarily concerned with foreign policy and economics. The base in the Republican Party are people who are concerned about issues like, say, immigration. They want to reduce immigration. Or they're often fiscal conservatives. They're concerned about things like taxes and spending. Or they're interested in the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. Or they're very religious people, and they see that religion is being removed from the public square in a way that they think is excessive or unacceptable. Or they tend to be social conservatives on other issues that they consider to be moral issues, like abortion or homosexuality and things of that nature. And this these currents, there's a number of these currents, but these currents really form much of the base of the Republican Party. And these are the kinds of folks that might have belonged to something like, say, the Tea Parties when they started to emerge. However, what we see now is a conflict between the Republican Party base that has really rallied behind Donald Trump because of Donald Trump's criticisms of immigration, because of his promise to take a hard line against Islamic terrorism, because of his purported economic nationalism. These are things that resonate well with the social conservatives and with the base of the conservative movement. The neoconservatives and the leadership of the conservative movement itself wants nothing to do with this. These people are cosmopolitan elites, journalists, academics, politicians, intellectuals, professional people, etc., who for the most part share the social liberalism of the Democratic Party. They may not be as extreme as, say, the social justice warrior people, obviously, and they may at times have some conservative inclinations, but these are not people for whom the Second Amendment is a primary issue. These are not people for whom restricting immigration is a primary issue. These are not necessarily people for whom conservative economic views like fiscal conservatism are really an issue. These are people for whom foreign policy is the primary issue, and maintaining the control of the Republican Party over the state, and in particular having a president that they can control and have access to, which they know they won't have with Donald Trump. They know that Donald Trump's going to pretty much do his own thing. And this is really unnerving to the conservative movement and to the Republican Party leadership, and certainly to the neoconservatives who recognize that Trump is someone from outside their own milieu. At the same time, because Trump speaks the language of the base of the conservative movement, he certainly has become very popular. So it's interesting to see that how the Trump candidacy has allowed this cleavage between the elites of the conservative movement and the Republican Party and the neocons on one hand, and the more rank and file grassroots conservatives on the other. Some years ago, I wrote an article that was originally published at Packy's magazine on the conservative movement, the post-war conservative movement. And what I basically argued is that the base for American conservatism has largely served as useful idiots for the neocons and for the plutocratic business elites that have always controlled and dominated the conservative movement. For example, if we look at all the time, the half a century now, that conservatism in the United States has actually been a movement, what we see is that they have achieved none of their stated goals except for one. They've always said that they wanted to roll back the welfare state. However, big government is now bigger, it's more expansive than ever. They've always said they were in favor of fiscal restraint. The U.S. public debt is now larger than it's ever been. It's one of the biggest national debts that's ever existed in world history. They've also said they wanted to promote social conservatism or traditional values. We see that.
Okay, do you guys remember the dramatic plane crash at the end of season 2 of Breaking Bad?
0,000. Juliet, Mike.
There's just too much going on for the air traffic controller to handle. And you see these two planes moving into each other, and then there is a nasty crash. Boom. Because the air traffic controller just couldn't handle what was going on. He was under too much stress. So Walter White is sitting out by his pool, and sitting there, calm, collected, and he hears a massive explosion up in the sky. Second season here of Breaking Bad. What the heck? What the heck, guys? So he looks up in the sky, sees that awful, awful plane crash. Is there anything to be learned here? What the heck's going on? Boom. Breaking Bad, created by Vince Gilligan. This is the Boeing 737 accident.
Scheduled programming to bring you this breaking news.
Good afternoon. In the last several minutes, KOB has received dozens of reports of what appears to be a crashed aircraft, possibly 2 aircraft on Albuquerque.
This is why Walter White is such a classic.
Details are scarce, but callers describe witnessing an explosion overhead, followed by falling debris.
Still sketchy, but crash investigators with the National Transportation Safety Board are expected on site as early as this evening. But officials warn that with a debris field of this magnitude, the investigation and the cleanup
are now saying that the Boeing 737
Okay,
was being
so is there any
rerouted or
deeper
vectored
meaning to all
through the
this?
airspace, which is
So
standard
I'm reading a
procedure,
book
according to a
called
spokesman for the
Forgive
FAA.
for Good,
The
a proven
King Air
prescription
350
for
was a
health
charter
and
flight
happiness.
operating out of St. George, Utah, bound for Amarillo, Texas.
And this is how the book starts out, and I think it's such an arresting image. Picture the crowded screen in front of a harried air traffic controller. Picture the chaos in the room and the jumble of planes on the screen. Now imagine that your unresolved grievances are the plane on that screen that have been circling for days and weeks on end. Most of the other planes have landed, but your unresolved grievances continue to take up precious airspace, draining resources that may be needed in an emergency. Having them on the screen forces you to work harder and increases the chance for accidents. The grievance planes become a source of stress and burnout. So if you've got a chip on your shoulder, if you've got grievances, it's like you're an air traffic controller, and these grievances that have been haunting you for days, weeks, months, and years, they're still on your screen, and they're preventing you from paying full attention to what's really going on in your life. So a plane crash, I think, is just the most dramatic example. So how do you get these planes up there in the first place, hanging around for weeks, months, and years? 1, you take things too personally. 2, you continue to blame the person who hurt you for how bad you feel. And 3, you have created a grievance story. And those are the important elements for continuing to nurse a grievance.
Their leaders. Oh, no. In this country, Vladimir Putin alone chooses who the president is. Nancy Pelosi believes that. Watch.
The Chinese, what they said is China would prefer Joe Biden. Whether they do, that's their conclusion, that they would prefer Joe Biden. Russia is actively 24/7 interfering in our election. They did so in 2016, and they are doing so now. For more, the American people, I believe, think they should decide who the president of the United States is, not Vladimir Putin making that decision for us.
Oh, yes. Vladimir Putin making that decision for us. You thought it was gone forever because it was too stupid to continue, but no, the Russia lunacy is back. You'll notice that Pelosi in that clip acknowledged that China does want Joe Biden to win, but China's not a big deal compared to Russia. Russia's an economy the size of Texas. It's very powerful, unlike China, so pay no attention to the Chinese buying full-page infomercials in Jeff Bezos' Washington Post, or spying on American senators for decades, or taking over the world economy, or loosing at a pandemic on the world. No. Russia is the country that controls our marionette strings. Eric Swallow has long believed this. Watch.
With this specificity, does that call into greater question the goings-on of Trump allies like Senator Ron Johnson, who I believe has picked up and is running with some of this Kremlin-backed propaganda about Joe Biden?
Here we go again, Nicole.
Yeah.
This sounds awfully familiar. Members of the U.S. Senate are acting as Russian launderers of this information to bring down a U.S. candidate. That's reprehensible. It should stop.
Yeah. Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin seems like a kind of sensible, moderate, sort of businessman character, right? Choice of the Chamber of Commerce. No. All a cover. Ron Johnson is working for Vladimir Putin. MSNBC is on the case.
Russia is doing it again. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said it best. With Donald Trump, quote, all roads lead to Putin.
We see now useful idiots in the United States Senate that are passing off to the American people information that's incepted by the Russian intelligence services intended to undermine faith in the American system.
Russia, can't believe we're saying this, has friends in the U.S. Senate who are helping Russia disseminate their talking points here.
Russia is actively working to, quote, denigrate Joe Biden. My question for you is, Ron Johnson, senator from Wisconsin, is also actively working to denigrate Joe Biden. Are they in cahoots?
Because when you criticize Joe Biden, you're working for Putin. Hard to believe this is all happening. Glenn Beck, our friend, has been watching all of this for the past 4 years. He's, of course...
Okay, I don't think I can take any Glenn Beck. All right, here is Fred Luskin, author of that book, Forgive for Good, speaking about the power of forgiveness here.
My next guest is helping people discover the power of healing through sound. Dr. Fred Luskin, director of the Stanford Forgiveness Project, joins us now on Bay Area Focus. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Okay, so tell me about the power of forgiveness. Why is it so important for us to forgive?
Because people get hurt all the time, and people are unkind to other people. And if we don't let it go, we carry it with us. And like the simplest example, if you had a terrible breakup and somebody was really crappy to you, you bring that to the next person if you're not careful.
And that could affect you psychologically, physically. It can lead you into things like depression,
Well, the
anger.
thing it does mostly is it creates fear. So whenever something has happened that we haven't fully metabolized or digested or let go of, we're afraid. We're afraid that it might happen again. We're afraid that we can't cope. That releases stress chemicals, and over time, that can wear out parts of your body.
I always find it amazing. I mean, you'll see it on the news when victims' families forgive the person who did harm to their family. And I always think, how is that possible? Because I kind of relate it to my own family. Would I be able to forgive?
And you're looking and saying, there's no way I could do that.
Right.
I know.
What are some of the steps we can take toward that, even in the face of something very difficult as death?
Well, the first step is to feel the pain. If you rush through and don't allow yourself to recognize how much harm there's been, it's kind of a shortcut. But once you've forgiven it, you have to, most people have some kind of either faith and belief in something bigger. You have to have that. Two, you have to be able to calm yourself down. So people who forgive, they either practice some kind of meditation, or they're capable of going outside and noticing what a beautiful day it is. Even though this rotten thing has happened, it's still beautiful out. And the last thing is you have to stop looking at the past, look towards the future.
You can't hold on to that.
Can't hold on.
How did you get interested in all of this? Because you wrote a book, you teach.
Yeah, I was hurt badly by somebody, and I couldn't figure out what to do. And one day somebody told me that, like at some level you're becoming a bitter pain in the, what? And so I had to grow up, and it was very hard. I turned what I learned into the Stanford Forgiveness Project.
So healing through sound.
Well, and I'm partnering with a woman who does sound healing. We're doing a talk and a show next week.
Okay, this is Fred Luskin. Herb K, the 12-step guru, he says that this book, Forgive for Good, is the second most important book he has ever read next to the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So what is forgiveness? Forgiveness is the peace you learn to feel when you allow these circling planes of resentment to land. Forgiveness is for you, not the offender. Forgiveness is taking back your power. Forgiveness is taking responsibility for how you feel. Forgiveness is about your healing. It is not about the people who hurt you. Do not suggest that forgiveness means we give up our right to be angry when we have been hurt or mistreated. My forgiveness research shows that people retain their ability to be angry, but simply use that ability differently. Use it wisely. I define forgiveness as the experience of peace and understanding that can be felt in the present moment. You forgive by challenging the rigid rules you have for other people's behavior and by focusing your attention on the good things in your life as opposed to the bad. So there are three core components that underlie the creation of any long-standing grievance. One, the exaggerated taking of personal offense. Two, the blaming of the offender for how you feel. Three, the creation of a grievance story. Forgiveness training reduces depression, increases hope, decreases anger, improves spiritual connection, increases emotional self-confidence, and helps heal relationships. Learning to forgive is good for both your mental and your physical well-being and your relationships. So do you talk over and over about what happened to you, how people screwed you over? Do you let your mind dwell on your grievances many times during the day? Do you have friends or family who do this? Do you get tired of the amount of time that you spend thinking about things from your past? Do you get tired of listening to other people repeat their same stories? So I used to carry with me a tremendous amount of grievances, and now comparatively few. And I don't enjoy being around people who are filled with grievance. If you can view your mind as your home, I can teach you how to control how much space you rent to your wounds and grievances. You are the proprietor, and you set the rent. Each of us decides who our tenants are and the conditions of their lease. What kind of accommodations do we want to give to our wounds and our grievances? We can rent our grievances the master bedroom and build them a hot tub out back. We can give them a great lease with terrific terms that never expire, or we can grant them only a day-to-day tenancy. We can allow them to put their stuff all in the rooms of the house, or we can restrict them to a small room in the back. How much time do we want to spend thinking about our hurts and our disappointments? And when we think about them, how much intensity is there? The answers to these questions determine how much of a problem a grievance will cause you. When you have rented too much space in your mind, then you have a grievance. When you have to do work that you do not want to do and then you obsess over it, you fuel a grievance. You can focus on your dislike of your job, or you can focus on the possibilities of making a lot of money or the reality of whatever your paycheck will be. If you do not learn how to deal with not getting what you want, you create out of that inability a grievance. Do you find your problems more compelling than your blessings? Do you rent out more space to what is wrong than what is right? So what plays on the screen of our mind is like a TV show that we can control with a remote. We can watch horror movies, we can watch sex, we can watch soap operas, we can watch grievance channels. We can focus on the beauties of nature and the kindness of people. Anyone can tune in to a grievance or can choose to switch to the forgiveness channel. What is playing on your TV set today? Is your remote tuning into channels that help you feel good or that remind you of your grievances? If you remember the air traffic control screen from the introduction, your grievances are the planes that will not land. They fill up your screen. They occupy your mind. They make it harder for you to appreciate the things in your life that are wonderful. Missing the beauty in our lives is the unanticipated damage that grievances can create. We can watch just one TV channel at a time, and what we tune into becomes a habit. The basis of any grievance is that something painful happened to you, and at the time, you did not have the skills to manage your emotional pain. Each of us knows someone who simply does not let things bother them. Some people are able to adapt to difficulty. Others remain stuck for years in resentment and grievance. The Roman philosopher Seneca said, "A physician is not angry at the intemperance of a mad patient, nor does he take it ill to be railed at by a man in a fever. Just so should a wise man treat all mankind as a physician does his patient, and look upon them only as sick and as extravagant." So this is Fred Luskin on Forgive for Good.
Some of the extra stuff we put around all this is what makes it such an interesting thing for me. Like all the drama that we lay over the simple reality that most of us are unimaginably selfishly absorbed. Because of that, we hurt other people and magnify the things done to us way out of proportion. So that's it. You know, like we're so narcissistically absorbed that we think that the world begins and ends with us, that the rest of the world literally barely matters, and that, you know, some of us can keep grudges going for 50 years. No, it's right before I got in here, I'm flying to New York after this, just teaching at Omega, and I teach with, this stuff is remarkable, not my piece of it, but I teach with a surgeon who is showing people that you don't really need spinal surgery except in the most extreme conditions. And that he has, I don't know how many patients, 100 or 200 patients that he has helped in part with forgiveness. That you know, you don't have to have all this rage and stuff. But he just sent me an email from a psychologist who was saying to him, and he passed it on to me because he didn't know the answer. He said, "Okay, I get it. You're supposed to forgive the past." This is what the psychologist was saying. "But I have all these adult patients whose parents are still irritating the hell out of them." And first of all, how do you take that even seriously? Like, you're an adult. If you don't want your parent to irritate you, don't communicate with them. Just do whatever you want. You're 45 years old. But so he says to me, my patients are always saying, "I can get over the past," which I don't believe. I don't believe at all, because if you can get over the past, then you know how to get over stuff so you can deal with the present. But at least they like to convince themselves that they're more noble than they actually are. I can get over the past, but it's the present stuff where they haven't changed and they're still like violating my boundaries and blah, 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 blah. And they're still the same rotten human being they've been since I've been 6. That's not the sign of somebody who's gotten over the past, right? At all. But so the therapist was asking, what do I say to them? And I said, well, the only thing I wrote back, because I get this question too often, I said, well, tell your clients that they're asking the wrong question, or the wrong couple of questions. Like, one, like, why am I still expecting old people to be different than they are? Like, haven't I learned anything? And two, why haven't I not in my adult life learned to take responsibility for how I feel? Like, it's nothing to do with your parents anymore. Like, you know, you. Like, asking the wrong questions. And I was thinking, like, why isn't that a more common question? Like, what are we all doing blaming everybody? And I understand some of it, but I don't understand all of it. I don't understand fully the human tendency to not want to own our own bad behavior. That I don't fully understand. That somebody who's upset with their mother for 40 years, irregardless of what their mother did, has a problem. Their mother, it doesn't matter what the mother did. If you stay upset with somebody for 40 years, you haven't checked life out at all. Like you've been living in a bunker, with no information coming in, barely air. And what are you doing? Like 40 years later, still thinking your childhood matters? Like, are you kidding me? Like right now, there's like, I don't know, I don't remember what the exact number is, but you know these horrible stories that like 35,000 children starve to death every day under the age of like 8. And you're still worried about what happened when you were 8? Go feed somebody. Go do something useful. But the very fact that you're still thinking of your childhood now as if it matters is shocking to me. Not shocking, because we all do that, but just like, are you kidding? Like that's a relevant question? And so that's what I mean by people are in a bunker. Like it's an airtight way of having the world not really exist outside of your own head. Because there's suffering everywhere you look. So why are we so obsessed with ours? Especially old stuff. I mean, new stuff, yeah, it makes sense. But old stuff? Like, I know people who are still mad at dead people. See, that's the one that gives me like real humor. Like, you're mad at dead people. Sometimes a lot of dead people. Like, I can't believe they did that, but they're dead. But this is our mind. This is the mind that we are saddled with. A mind that makes enormous difficulty for us and causes us so much pain because we don't see life clearly at all. Like we don't check it out. And the things that I have seen, again, I've been running the Stanford Forgiveness Project now for almost 20 years. And I've met a good number of people who have experienced real horror that I don't even know I don't even have words for. It's like, I don't know how anybody copes with some of this stuff. But 95% of the stuff I've seen is just everyday stuff. My husband lied to me, my kids lied to me, I lied to me. They don't love me anymore, I don't love them anymore. They were mean, nasty, unconscious, insensitive, just everyday stuff. And if you look around, it's happening everywhere, all over the place. So what is that quality that has us obsess about the everyday stuff that happened to us and regurgitated endlessly, awash in a world of real current suffering? Like, how do we defend that to ourselves? How do we defend the capacity of our mind to literally hold on to memories of things that happened to us in this short life where we could actually be useful, to help? So there's this enormous disconnect of attention and empathy, that's normative. It's and having worked in some really awful situations, so we've done a small amount of work in the Catholic and Protestant thing in Northern Ireland, and we've done some work post like civil war in Sierra Leone, and like places where it's like unimaginably horrific. And part of that is because human beings hold on to their own stuff, sometimes for generations and generations and generations. Like, your side killed my like my great-grandfather's like third cousin. Your side did that, so I'm not letting go of that family hatred or tribal hatred to your side. So we have the capacity, we don't recognize how cruel that is to hold on to it. What an act of violence that is, that we're seeding the world with violence, of hatred and contempt and all this other stuff by holding on. It's like what is unseen is how much it takes two to make a problem. One person to give offense, but you fully require the other to take offense. And if the other person is healed enough and there's no offense taken, then you don't have the same problem. But we're not taught that it takes two to have a problem, of the offender and the offendee who's so identified with the role of offendee. Hi, I'm Fred, I had a lousy mother. You know what I mean? It's like, what does that mean? But it gives me a way, when I say, hi, I'm Fred, I had a lousy mother, it gives me a way to then pay the world back for not loving me enough. It gives me an excuse, it gives me a mental schema, and it gives me a way to defend my own insensitivity. Well, of course I'm not nice to you. I wasn't loved as a kid. Well, we all do this. Every one of us does this in our intimate relationships. Well, what are you expecting of me, to be an adult? What are you, crazy? We all do this. Don't expect me to be an adult. But the pain of like not releasing the identity of victimhood, it doesn't mean you forget what happened, but there's a very specific kind of identity that I'm a victim. I've been harmed by something like outside of me. And therefore, I don't have to be fully responsible for how I live my adult life. which is it's a very delicate thing. I remember, and there was some very interesting experience I had as these ideas were forming in me. I remember once I was doing a couples therapy session, maybe 20 years ago. And I remember, like, person A, not couple A, but like, I have no idea what gender this person was, but I'll make they were female.
Well, the chairs.
And the husband said something obnoxious to the woman. And I remember the woman turning to him with contempt and said, "How dare you talk to me like that? You know that's the way my father used to talk to me, and I told you never do that." And she was angry. And I'm sitting there as the therapist thinking, wait, there's something so wrong with this picture, so wrong. I couldn't articulate what was so wrong with it. And it took me a little while to realize that what's so wrong with it is that she needed to be apologizing to him. "I'm sorry. I'm triggered by my past. It's not you. It's me. You're not my father. In fact, my father's not even my father anymore. I'm 35 years old. It's all me. And I'm really sorry that I brought my crap to this marriage." And I remember thinking, I'm in a very strange field that doesn't make that abundantly clear. Like, wait a second, honey. How old are you? And who's sitting in front of you? And whatever you tell yourself, that's fine, but this is not your dad. He never was your dad, and your dad isn't the same person anymore. So accept that you're damaged and own it and apologize for it, and then make haste to try to heal yourself. But I'm watching this, and I'm thinking, wow, this is so bizarre. Like, I never got any education in like anything around this kind of wait a second. This woman is, the only thing I'm seeing is her unkindness. He didn't try to hurt her, but she has attack. Because her role as a victim was so identified in her. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with her reacting with pain, because that's what's triggered and that's what her imprinting is. That I get. It's the schema and the language that she uses in herself that gives her permission to be harsh to him. We all do that to some degree.
There, out in the darkness, a fugitive running, fallen from God, fallen from grace. God be my witness, I never shall yield till we meet face to face, till we meet face to face. He knows his way in the dark, mine is the way of the Lord. Those who follow the path of the righteous shall have their reward. And if they fall as Lucifer fell, the flames, the sword, stars in your multitudes, scarce to be counted, filling the darkness with order and light. You are the sentinels, silent and sure, keeping watch in the night, keeping watch in the night. You know your place in the sky, you hold your course and your aim, and each season returns and returns, and is always the same. And if you fall as Lucifer fell, you fall in flame. And so it must be, and so it is written on the doorway to paradise. Those who falter and those who fall must pay the price.
Okay, and one more song. It's Mrs. Scott Adams. Look at that amazing finger work. mean, it's so sad, Christina notes, for those people making comments about my attire and angle of camera. I don't spend months learning incredibly difficult piano pieces to show off my chest. I thought maybe people would want to see my finger movements. And I'm not going to wear a turtleneck in 95-degree weather. It's pathetic. So she was playing Chariots of Fire in D-flat major, and Matthias says, what does Matthias say? That the commenters are wanting to give her the D major. Disavow